Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we slip through a pair of swinging doors and into one of the most famous rooms in popular memory. But was an Old West saloon really a non-stop carnival of gun smoke, card sharks, and piano keys rattling under flying bottles? Or was the truth far stranger, quieter, and more human than legend ever admits? You stand at the edge of a frontier street as dusk lowers itself over packed earth. Wagon ruts and hitching posts rubbed smooth by rains and restless hands. Lamplight glows through dusty windows. Laughter leaks into the evening. Somewhere inside, glass taps wood with a neat little click that sounds almost civilized, which is funny, because civilization here often wears muddy boots and a borrowed smile. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're getting comfortable, tell me your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you step forward. The batwing doors nudge against your sleeves with a soft thump, and the room receives you in layers. First comes the temperature, warmer than the street, carrying the heat of lamps, bodies, and a stove that has been fed all day with wood and bad intentions. Then comes the smell. Tobacco smoke hangs in the air like thin fabric. Beer has soured into the floorboards. Whiskey breath drifts past with hints of molasses, spice, and plain old regret. You catch soap somewhere too, a clean note that seems determined to lose the fight. The light is lower than you expect. It is not romantic exactly. Practical. Lamps throw yellow pools across tables and leave corners in patient shadow. A mirror behind the bar doubles the room and makes it seem fuller, grander, slightly less tired. Bars loved mirrors for that reason. They suggested elegance at a very affordable price, which is a frontier talent in itself. A man can feel like a duke if the glass is polished enough. Boot heels scrape, chairs complain. Someone laughs from deep in the chest, as if laughter is another job he gets paid to perform. A piano picks out a tune in the far corner, not loudly, not yet, just enough to thread melody through the murmur of voices. The player keeps going while talking to somebody over one shoulder, because in a saloon, music is not always an event. Often it is furniture you can hear. You pause just inside the doorway, and that matters more than you might think. New arrivals are observed, not dramatically. No trumpet blast, no collective gasp. Just a slight turning of heads, a flick of the eyes, a brief measuring. Frontier towns could be porous places. Strangers arrived every week by horse, wagon, rail, stagecoach, or sheer stubbornness. Yet every stranger represented a question. Are you spending money, looking for work, hunting someone, hiding from someone selling cattle? Selling lies. It is amazing how much curiosity can fit into a 2-second glance. You feel it especially from the wall. Men stand there with shoulders tilted back, boots braced, thumbs hooked in suspenders or belt. They are not always the most dangerous men in the room, but they are often the men most committed to looking untroubled, which can be just as useful. One of them lifts his chin at you. Another returns to his drink without interest. That is its own kind of mercy. The floor beneath you is rough plank, scarred by years of spurs, chair legs, and spills. Sawdust may be scattered in places, though not every saloon used it as heavily as movies suggest. Sometimes it helped with mud and spit. Sometimes it simply made a place look busier, as though filth had been thoughtfully organized. Old frontier towns had a genius for improvisation. Cleanliness was more aspiration than condition. You move farther in, and details gather around you. Hats remain on heads. Nobody seems especially offended by that. Coats hang from pegs or slump over chairbacks. A pot-bellied stove ticks quietly as heat shifts through its metal skin. Near it, 2 men talk in low voices over a newspaper that has already changed hands half a dozen times. That was one of the ordinary truths of the saloon. It was not just a drinking room. In many towns, it served as an unofficial club, post office, hiring hall, rumour exchange, and shelter from weather or loneliness. A person might enter for whiskey and leave with a job, a poker debt, local election gossip, and someone else's scarf. The bartender notices you, of course. Bartender's noticed everything. He dries a glass with a cloth that may or may not be improving the situation. and his face does that professional calculation halfway between welcome and caution. A good bartender needed memory, patience, speed, and a talent for ending arguments before arguments became furniture damage. Historians still argue over how polished and luxurious the average saloon truly was, because surviving photographs show a wide range, from simple plank rooms to ornate bars with carved wood, chandeliers, and imported bottles. The frontier, annoyingly for storytellers, refused to stay consistent. From where you stand, this place leans toward effortful respectability. The bar itself is handsome, probably the room's proudest possession. Its varnish catches the lamplight. Brass rails shine where boots rest. Shelves rise behind it in a display of bottles meant to suggest abundance, though some labels may conceal refilled contents of less distinguished ancestry. That happened more than owners like to admit. A frontier saloon could advertise champagne and serve optimism in a glass. You almost have to admire the confidence. Voices move around you in different tempos. Near the door, conversation snaps short and fast, full of arrivals, departures, prices, weather, and horses. By the bar, the talk slows into longer strands, because drinking invites repetition, and repetition is the handrail of the mildly intoxicated. At one table, 3 men speak Spanish. At another, you hear German. A burst of Irish cadence rises beside the piano. Western towns were far more mixed than old legends usually allow. Cowboys, miners, merchants, railroad workers, immigrants, drifters, freedmen, lawmen, and local businessmen crossed these rooms. The myth likes a single type. Reality preferred a crowd. You become aware of your own clothing, your own dust, your own hands. That is another feature of a saloon entrance. The room encourages self-consciousness. You do not merely enter, you compare. Is your coat better than theirs? Have you arrived with money enough to behave confidently, or just enough to order one drink and nurse it like philosophy class was present here, though often disguised under sweat and broad hats? The wealthy cattleman and the tired labourer might drink under one roof, yet the quality of cigar, boot leather, and credit extended at the bar could quietly sort the room into invisible ranks. A server slips past carrying glasses on a tray, moving with an ease that tells you she has already dodged elbows. Flirting, an accidental genius from men who think standing upright is a personal achievement. She does not waste her attention. That too feels real. The women working in saloons often had to master a rapid reading of character. One smile too warm could be mistaken. One glance too cold could cost a tip. Popular stories flatten them into decorative background, but many were skilled professionals navigating a crowded economy with sharp instincts. The piano tune picks up a little, its cheerful bounce slightly at odds with the faces around it. Not everyone here looks happy. That is useful to notice. The saloon gathered loneliness as reliably as it gathered smoke. Men came off cattle trails after months of dust and monotony. Miners came down from camps with wages in pocket and ache in bone. Travellers entered towns where nobody knew their names. Drinking promised company, and company did not always require intimacy. Sometimes it was enough to sit in shared noise, to hear other lives clatter around you, to feel less like a loose nail in a very large landscape. You reach the bar and rest your fingertips on the wood. It is sticky in one spot, smooth in another, warm where the room has breathed on it all day. The bartender asks what you're having. The question sounds simple. It carries tiny social consequences. Order too grandly and you invite inspection. Order too timidly and you announce uncertainty. Beer was common. Whiskey too, though both varied wildly in quality. Contrary to the old image of endless refined bourbon, much frontier liquor could be harsh, young, adulterated, or locally improvised. Some whiskies were decent. Some tasted like punishment with a burnt afterthought. You ask for whiskey because it feels appropriate, and soon a small glass lands before you. The liquid catches gold from the lamp, more beautiful than it probably deserves. You lift it. The smell climbs sharp and medicinal. When you sip, it burns straight and honest, then leaves behind sweetness so faint you suspect imagination deserves partial credit. There it is, the famous frontier drink, not elegant, not subtle, yet warming, immediate, and efficient, which, if you think about it, describes much of life in such places. A man beside you nods toward your glass as if you have passed a minor test. He has a sun-scored face, a pale line where a hat usually protects the forehead, and hands that look permanently shaped by rains. He says something dry about the whiskey being good enough to strip paint. Gentle sarcasm lives comfortably in saloons. It is the preferred language of people who are tired, but not ready to admit tenderness. You answer in kind, and the exchange settles you. Belonging can begin in very small increments. Somebody at a table behind you swears softly over cards. Coins click, a chair tips, then thumps back onto all four legs. No panic follows. Disorder here has gradations. Most of the time, the room does not explode. It simmers. The legend of constant chaos makes great entertainment. But many saloons depended on regular custom and could not afford nightly destruction. Owners wanted spenders, not shattered windows. Quite a few houses enforced rules with surprising firmness, from banning certain weapons inside to refusing service to men already wobbling toward disaster. Not every proprietor succeeded, obviously. Still, a business that sold vice usually preferred it tidy enough to profit. You glance again at the mirror behind the bar. It lets the bartender watch the room without turning around, and perhaps that is the cleverest object here. In its reflection, you see the whole theatre of the place. The piano player with sleeves rolled up, the gambler shuffling with careful fingertips, the server angling between tables, the ranch hand laughing with his mouth open wide enough to show a missing tooth, the older man alone with a beer and the expression of someone who has come mostly to be near voices. The reflection makes them look like cast members, but their weariness gives them away. These are working lives passing through a rented evening. A quirky detail drifts into your mind as you look around. In some Western saloons, free lunches were offered with the purchase of a drink, not out of charity, but strategy. Salty meats, cheeses, pickles, bread, and sometimes eggs encouraged more thirst than satisfaction. Hospitality? Yes, but with a business model tucked inside it. The frontier did enjoy a practical joke dressed as generosity. Somewhere on a counter nearby, a plate of crackers sits under a cloth, waiting to continue that noble tradition. The room grows louder for a few minutes as more people come in from the street. The doors flap, boots cross the threshold, cool air slips through and vanishes into the heat. Each arrival slightly rewrites the room's balance. Two men in town clothes bring a scent of hair tonic and ink, perhaps clerks or agents. A labourer enters with lime dust on his sleeves. A young fellow tries to swagger and overshoots into something almost theatrical. You can spot the practiced drinkers by how little they announce themselves. Confidence, like good tailoring, is often quieter than expected. Yet for all the performance, you sense an undertow of caution. Many men on the frontier lived close to financial failure, injury, weather, and chance. A saloon might appear loose, but people carried private calculations into it. What can I spend? Whom can I trust? Which table is safe? Who owes me? Who resents me? Scholars continue debating how much popular memory exaggerates saloon danger, because newspapers, memoirs, and dime novels all had reasons to favour sensational stories. A quiet evening never sold half so well as a chair through a window. You finish another careful sip. The whiskey sits in your chest like a coal wrapped in cloth. The piano turns jaunty. Someone begins to sing half a line and gives up. Outside, a wagon rattles past. Inside, the lamps flutter once in a draught and steady themselves. The atmosphere settles around you, thicker now, as if the room has decided you're not a passing mistake. You are part of its count. That is the strange truth of the saloon at first meeting. It is neither pure lawlessness nor polished glamour. It is a social machine made of wood, smoke, money, appetite, boredom, hope, and watchfulness. It can be coarse. It can be lively. It can be lonely enough to ache. It offers warmth, witnesses, and temporary membership to people who may have very little else in common. You stand there with your hand on the hearing glasses ring, boots shift, cards whisper, and lamp flames hum softly above it all. and the old room begins to feel less like a myth, and more like what it always was, a place where ordinary human beings came to be seen, to disappear, to boast, to bargain, to listen, and for a few amber hours, not to sit alone with the dark, you lift your glass again, and now the room reveals itself through drink. That sounds poetic. It is also practical. In an Old West saloon, what people drank mattered almost as much as where they stood while drinking it. A glass was a refreshment, social signal, minor gamble, and sometimes a test of constitution. You could learn a surprising amount by watching a man order. The ranch hand with trail dust still on his cuffs might ask for whiskey and swallow it like medicine. The clerk in a cleaner collar might prefer beer and take his time. The gambler, of course, might order whatever looked casual enough to keep attention off his thoughts. Nothing in a saloon was ever just one thing. The bartender reaches for a bottle without ceremony. That alone tells you something. Many drinks were served quickly, often in plain glasses, with little of the fussy ritual modern bars like to admire in themselves. No one here is shaving ice into crystal cups while discussing botanical notes. Frontier drinking usually favoured speed over elegance. The point was warmth, courage, fellowship, thirst, profit, or escape. Occasionally all five, which is a crowded job for one small glass. Whiskey was the famous staple, though the word covered a broad and alarming territory. Some of it was imported and decent. Some was regional and rough. Some was blended, stretched, or tampered with in ways that would make a chemist sigh and a physician reach for a chair. Good liquor travelled badly, cost money, and was not always easy to secure in growing towns where supply lines could be thin and demand could be heroic. A saloon owner with an honest bottle had every reason to show it off. A less honest owner had every reason to hide behind labels, mirrors, and confidence. You watch the bartender pour for 2 minors at the far end of the bar. The whiskey hits the glasses with a quick amber flash. One man sniffs it, winces, and grins anyway. The other throws his back at once. That was common. The drink often arrived in a measure meant to be taken promptly, not admired under the light like a jewel. Frontier whiskey could burn fiercely enough to make your eyes sting. It might carry hints of grain, smoke, molasses, or plain raw spirit. It could also taste vaguely of barrel, metal, dust, and ambition. Civilization, in liquid form, was still under construction. Beer was another favourite, and in some towns it could be a welcome relief from harsher spirits. Lager brewing spread with German immigrants, and beer gardens, breweries, and saloons connected to them became important parts of Western social life. That detail gets forgotten when popular memory turns the whole frontier into a whiskey advertisement. Beer could be cloudy, warmish, or surprisingly good, depending on local conditions and the skill of the brewer. In hotter regions and keeping it cool was a challenge. Ice was precious. Storage was unreliable. A fresh beer on a warm evening might still feel like a little miracle. The glasses themselves interest you. Some are thick and plain. Some are chipped. Some look mismatched, as if they have survived several owners and 1 or 2 regrettable incidents. Fancy stemware existed in more upscale establishments, especially in larger towns eager to advertise refinement, but many saloons use sturdy glass made for hard lives. You set your fingers around one and feel the faint grease of handling, the coolness already slipping away in the room's warm breath. Touch tells the truth quickly. Nearby, a man orders straight from a bottle. Not common everywhere, but it happened. Another asks for beer and a shot together, a combination that says he has somewhere between courage and poor planning. At a table, somebody is stirring sugar into coffee laced with liquor. Not every drinker came for drunkenness alone. Coffee, especially in busy rail towns or late hours, could travel beside stronger things. Stimulant and sedative under one roof. Human beings are wonderfully contradictory. You notice that the pace of drinking varies with occupation. Men fresh off hard labour often drink with a kind of decisive gratitude. Their bodies want calories, warmth, numbness, or all three. Those with money to spend more leisurely may turn each round into a social performance, talking between sips, lingering over stories, buying for others. Buying rounds carried weight. A man who treated the bar could advertise success, generosity, or vanity. Sometimes all three arrive together wearing a pleasant smile. There is a custom to it. One glass leads to another, but not always because the thirst has vanished. Refusing a drink could be awkward depending on the company. Accepting one created a small social thread between you and the buyer. It could mean goodwill. It could mean expectation. It could mean a salesman has spotted your wallet. In some rooms, a man might nurse one drink all evening if his money was thin, but social pressure often worked against thrift. Saloons were designed to turn moments into purchases. Free lunch helps with that scheme. On a side counter, beneath a hanging lamp, you see cold cuts, bread, maybe cheese, pickles, and hard-boiled eggs. The arrangement looks generous. It is not entirely innocent. Salty foods encouraged thirst, and thirst encouraged more orders. Some saloons became known for especially good free lunches, drawing working men who needed a meal as much as a drink. Owners knew exactly what they were doing. A few slices of ham could lead a man toward 3 more glasses with admirable efficiency. Frontier capitalism rarely missed a trick. The smell around the lunch spread is heavy and inviting. Vinegar from pickles, yeast from bread, sharp cheese sweating slightly in the warm room, mustard, smoked meat. You tear off a piece of bread and feel the rough crust give way under your fingers. It steadies the whiskey somewhat. That too is part of the rhythm here. Drink, bite, talk, laugh, lean, order again. Wine appears less often, though it is not absent from the Western world. In some regions, especially where cultural tradition supported it, wine could be available, but it never owned the saloon imagination the way whiskey and beer did. Imported spirits might sit on shelves for show or for wealthier patrons wanting a gesture of sophistication. Brandy, rum, and gin all had their place depending on trade routes and taste. Yet the ordinary heartbeat of many saloons came from simpler orders. Beer, whiskey, beer again. The classics of expedience. There is also the matter of cocktails, though not every saloon served them with equal style. Mixed drinks certainly existed in the 19th century, and urban bars could be surprisingly elaborate. But frontier conditions varied wildly. A more prosperous saloon in a booming town might offer punches, cobblers, slings, or bitters-based concoctions if ingredients were available. Another place might interpret the idea of a cocktail as whiskey, briefly introduced to sugar before both lost interest. Historians still debate how far Eastern drinking fashions travelled west in daily practice, because menus, newspaper ads, memoirs, and surviving accounts do not always agree. The frontier liked borrowing habits, but it also liked simplifying them. A drummer, meaning a travelling salesman, is explaining to anyone who will listen that he once had a proper mint julep in a hotel bar back east. He describes crushed ice, silver cup, fresh mint, and a level of ceremony that sounds almost suspicious in this room. The men around him listen with expressions halfway between curiosity and teasing. One asks whether the drink came with a butler and a violinist. The table laughs. The salesman laughs too, though with the slightly strained tone of a man whose story has drifted beyond his control. You can taste the cultural divide in that little exchange. The saloon often balanced between aspiration and mockery. Towns wanted polish, yet distrusted too much of it. A polished bar front was welcome. A polished accent might invite jokes. Fancy liquor labels could signal quality, but too much fuss around drinking could appear soft, urban, or absurd. The frontier admired usefulness first. Ornament had to justify itself. A bottle near the mirror catches your eye because its label promises imported excellence in grand lettering. Whether the contents match is another matter. Adulteration was a real concern in the 19th century. Some sellers stretched liquor with water, others used flavourings, colouring, or dubious additives to imitate age or quality. The more isolated the market, the more room there was for creative dishonesty. A man ordering whiskey in a frontier saloon was not merely choosing a drink. He was entering a small trust exercise with a stranger holding a bottle. You take another sip and let it rest on the tongue a moment longer. The burn arrives in stages, first sharpness, then heat, then a faint sweetness. It is better this time, or perhaps your mouth has surrendered. The body learns quickly, around you. That lesson is repeated dozens of times an hour. Glasses lifted, faces tightened, shoulders loosened, voices warmed. A saloon soundtrack was often built from these tiny transitions. The click of glass on wood, the brief inhale after a swallow, a laugh arriving half a second later than usual. Not everyone drinks to excess. That part matters too. The old fantasy of universal stupor misses the many men who drank sparingly, especially if they still had work, a horse, a long walk, or a reputation to manage. Some watered their whiskey, some switched to beer, some sat with one glass for a remarkable length of time simply to buy a seat inside company and lamplight. A saloon-sold atmosphere as surely as alcohol. A man could purchase belonging by the ounce. Then there are those who cannot stop gracefully. You see one near the far table. His gestures have become wider than necessary. His laugh starts before the joke. He leans in too close and repeats himself with increasing conviction. The room adjusts to him without openly naming it. His companions answer a little less. The bartender glances over more often. That is another hidden ritual of the saloon. Intoxication was tolerated up to the point where it threatened business, peace, or furniture. Not every house drew the line in the same place. Good bartenders knew how to delay a troublesome man with food, coffee, conversation, or strategic neglect. A quirky bit of frontier drinking culture lingers in the room as well. Bitters, which later generations would treat mainly as cocktail ingredients, were sometimes sold or used as near-medicinal tonics. In certain places and circumstances, people consumed them with a seriousness that slid conveniently toward recreation. The 19th century adored anything that sounded medicinal. Add a label promising vigor or digestive relief, and people could persuade themselves of almost anything. Human self-deception, you notice, is an old and durable craft. The pianist pauses to drink beer from a mug left on top of the instrument. He wipes foam from his lip with the back of his hand, cracks his knuckles, and resumes the tune. There is something comforting in that small action. Music, drink, and labour continue side by side. Even entertainment here has to stay hydrated. At the bar, two cowboys argue mildly about whether local whiskey is worse than trail coffee. This is a serious frontier debate. Trail coffee had a reputation for being boiled hard enough to wake the dead and strong enough to alarm the living. One man insists whiskey is crueler because it pretends to be pleasure first. The other says coffee never lies. The bartender offers no opinion, which suggests wisdom. You begin to sense how drink shapes time in the room. Minutes soften, pauses lengthen. A story that might have taken 20 seconds outside stretches to 3 minutes indoors. Embroidered with detours and sound effects, people lean in closer as the evening deepens. The boundary between stranger and acquaintance grows more porous after the second round. Hands land on shoulders, coins slide across the bar. Somebody decides to sing a chorus he absolutely does not know properly. Nobody seems shocked. The saloon profits from this softening. The more the room relaxes, the more generous it becomes toward itself. Another round, another plate, another wager, another boast, another confession made just quietly enough to feel safe. You realize that alcohol here is not simply a substance. It is a social engine. It smooths edges, blurs rank, invites theatre, and occasionally strips pretense straight off a man's face. Yet the edge never disappears entirely. Drink could cheer, but it could also inflame old grievances, loosen bad judgment, and empty wages meant for rent or supplies. Temperance critics were not inventing every concern out of thin air. Saloons drew fierce opposition partly because they were visible stages where all the risk of alcohol became public. Wives, ministers, reformers, and town boosters often saw in these rooms a machine that converted pay into trouble. They were not always wrong. They just rarely described the warmth, fellowship, and relief that also kept people coming back. You rest your palm on the bar and feel a ring of moisture beneath your glass. Your fingertips trace the damp circle. The wood smells faintly of old beer and polish. Someone orders another pitcher. Somewhere behind you, a cork comes free with a soft pop. The bartender's sleeves are rolled neatly. His motions stay economical, never rushed, never wasted. Pour, slide, collect coin, nod, wipe, repeat. He is conducting the room through liquid, and you, standing here with warmth in your chest and the taste of rough whiskey lingering at the back of your mouth, understand something essential. The drinks of the Old West were rarely glamorous in the way stories pretend. They were often blunt, uneven, improvised, and sometimes suspicious, but they were woven deeply into the social life of the saloon. In every swallow there was commerce, performance, appetite, and longing. A glass could comfort, impress, deceive, celebrate, or disappoint. Usually it managed 2 or 3 at once. That is almost enough to make the whiskey taste refined. You stay at the bar long enough to realize that the counter is not merely furniture. It is the true spine of the room. Everything bends toward it. Money lands there. News arrives there. Arguments begin there in low voices before drifting into open air. Hands tap it for service, for emphasis, for luck, for rhythm. A tired man may lean his whole evening against that polished edge. The bar holds all of it without complaint, as though wood were naturally suited to human weakness. Its surface glows under the lamps, though closer inspection reveals scratches, water rings, nicks from belt buckles, and little dents where glasses have been set down too hard. That worn texture tells its own story. A frontier bar had to look respectable while surviving abuse. Many were built to impress, especially in prosperous towns where saloon owners understood that carved wood and a broad mirror could lend dignity to a business often accused of lacking it. Walnut, oak, and mahogany finishes appeared when owners could afford them. Brass rails added shine. Decorative back bars climbed upward in shelves and arches, framing rows of bottles like a stage set for appetite. You run your fingertips along the grain. It feels smooth in one patch and rough in another where varnish has surrendered. The brass footrail is cool through your boot sole. You shift your weight there, and immediately you understand why so many men preferred standing at the bar to sitting elsewhere. It offers a position of belonging without commitment. You are part of the room, but not trapped by conversation. You can watch everyone while pretending not to. It is a wonderfully efficient arrangement for the shy, the wary, and the mildly nosy. The bartender moves inside this narrow kingdom with practiced economy. He does not waste steps. Glasses are arranged within easy reach. Bottles are grouped by use, not sentiment. A towel hangs over one shoulder. Another rests near the sink or water bucket. He pours, wipes, nods, collects, and observes with a fluency that makes the work look easier than it is. Good bartending required memory sharp enough to track faces, names, debts, tempers, and preferences, often all at once. A regular enters and receives his beer before finishing the order. Another gets a small whiskey and a look that says pay first because reputation has layers. A third man asks for credit and receives a silence so polite it almost counts as music. Credit existed in many saloons, especially for known patron, but it was never purely generous. A running tab tied the drinker to the establishment in a quiet loop of obligation. If wages were late or luck had soured, that little line in the account book could begin to feel heavier than a saddle. The account book itself rests under the counter, thick with names and marks. Some men sign neatly, some make an X. Some speak with great confidence about settling up tomorrow, a day that has rescued many a doomed promise. The bartender keeps track because he must. Cash is best, but the frontier often ran on trust mixed with pressure. Cattle sales came seasonally. Mining luck arrived unevenly. Railroad pay might be regular, then vanish with layoffs. A saloon that refused all credit could lose business. One that gave too much might be pouring its profits into fantasy. Coins clink across the wood. Silver dollars, bits, small change, whatever the customer has at hand. The sound is bright and quick, a tiny metallic punctuation repeated all evening. Paper money appears too, soft from handling, folded into pockets, damp from sweat. The bartender tests bills with a glance and a touch. Counterfeit notes circulated in the 19th century often enough to keep businessmen cautious. In a saloon, where the light was low and the pace brisk, attention mattered. There is ritual here, but it is not delicate. A customer steps up, waits his turn, places an order, pays or argues, receives the drink, then either lingers or moves aside. The dance repeats with infinite small variations. One man raps the bar with a knuckle to summon service. Another simply catches the bartender's eye. That eye contact is important. The bartender decides sequence, pace, and sometimes social temperature. He can ignore a man a little longer if the fellow looks troublesome. He can hurry a favoured customer. He can interrupt a brewing quarrel by arriving in the middle of it with fresh glasses and a voice calm enough to flatten sparks. You begin to appreciate how much unofficial authority sits behind the counter. The owner may hold legal power in theory, but the bartender often rules in practice. He knows who carries a grudge and who just got paid, who lost at cards, who is mourning, who is showing off, and who is one insult away from regrettable heroics. He watches reflected faces in the mirror while polishing a glass. He hears the rise and fall of laughter. He can sense a room turning sour the way a sailor senses weather. Historians still dispute exactly how orderly the average saloon was from place to place, because memoirs and newspaper reports often favoured colourful extremes, yet surviving ordinances, business records, and eyewitness accounts suggest that many bar rooms functioned through a steady set of habits rather than constant eruption. Even vice needs routine. Without it, the glasses stop moving and the profit stops with them. A spittoon sits near the bar, heavy and dull in the lamplight. There may be several placed along the room with ambitious optimism. Their presence reminds you that public chewing tobacco was common, and that saloons were practical spaces in bodily ways modern nostalgia usually edits out. The floor smells faintly of stale beer, tobacco juice, damp sawdust, and old wood. Not lovely, exactly. Honest, perhaps. You have to grant the room that. Behind the bar, shelves rise in a symmetrical display that is part storage and part advertisement. Bottles stand in rows with labels facing outward when possible. Decanters occupy prominent spots. A few imported names lend prestige. Some local stock fills the gaps. A cigar box is tucked near the register or cash drawer. Glassware hangs or stacks nearby. There may be a bowl of lemons in a more ambitious establishment, or jars of pickled eggs, crackers, and cigars where impulse can do its little dance with appetite. A saloon was very good at placing temptation within easy reach of a resting elbow. The mirror deserves its reputation. It enlarges the room, doubles the lamplight, and lets customers admire their hats, moustaches, or carefully composed indifference. More importantly, it lets the bartender see what is unfolding at his back without appearing to stare. That mattered in a crowded room where staring itself could be interpreted as challenge. The mirror turns observation into architecture, a clever solution, and a beautiful one if the glass is clean enough. You watch a stranger approach with the uncertain posture of someone new in town. He hesitates, glances along the line of drinkers, then chooses a patch of counter with room to breathe. The bartender asks what he wants in a tone that is neither warm nor cold. That balance is part of the craft. Too friendly, and the house may attract trouble under the banner of welcome. Too harsh, and paying customers drift elsewhere. The best bartenders offered a measured hospitality that said, "You may stay, but do not make me regret it." Conversation at the bar follows loose rules. Topics begin casually and can widen quickly. Weather leads to trail conditions. Trail conditions lead to cattle prices. Cattle prices lead to politics. Politics leads to insults if nobody steers carefully. Men exchange town gossip between orders. Who bought land? Who skipped a debt? Whose horse went lame? Which merchant is overcharging for flour? Where a new strike may be found. A bar front served as bulletin board by voice, and not all information was reliable. In fact, some of the most confidently delivered statements in Western saloons were spectacularly untrue. That did not seem to slow them down. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you listen. In some towns, bartenders and owners kept handy clubs, blackjacks, or hidden firearms under the counter, not as decoration, but for emergencies. The polished elegance above often concealed blunt preparation below. Respectability, on the frontier, liked a backup plan. A drawer that held a ledger might also hold persuasion of a more immediate kind. The labour itself is constant. Glasses must be rinsed, or at least made to appear hopeful. Bottles need replacing. Beer kegs have to be tapped, hauled, and monitored. The bar must be wiped down even as new spills arrive. Free lunch trays need attention before they turn from strategy into warning. Cigars are sold, matches are provided. Sometimes letters are held for regulars. Sometimes messages are passed. In a few places, Bartenders acted as informal bankers, middlemen, or employment informants simply because everybody came through their orbit. The bar connected networks of local knowledge. You notice the toll this takes on the man serving. His posture is erect, but his eyes never rest. His sleeves are clean at the start of the evening and less so later on. He works through smoke, chatter, heat, and sudden demands without stepping away from the performance of calm. A bartender who looked flustered invited pressure. One who stayed composed made the room feel governed. That composure was a kind of labour seldom credited by popular legend, which prefers the flashy gambler or the singing girl. Yet the room would collapse into muddle without the person keeping liquid and order in motion. A customer spills beer near his elbow. The bartender wipes it with 3 swift passes and continues serving another man without breaking rhythm. That efficiency looks simple because it has been rehearsed through repetition. People who perform routine well often receive the least romantic praise, though they deserve the most practical admiration. The bar also divides and unites. Men stand shoulder to shoulder who might never share a table. A ranch owner and a labourer can both rest elbows on the same wood while keeping very different futures in their pockets. Money narrows the gap for a moment, but does not erase it. Who gets easy credit, who pays up front, who receives a nod of recognition, who waits longer for service? All of this quietly maps the social order. The counter may look democratic, yet status stains it in invisible layers. Glassware catches the light as the bartender lifts and turns each piece. Some saloons used communal rinsing methods that were, let us say, optimistic by modern standards. A glass might be dunked in water and sent back into service with confidence exceeding sanitation. Frontier customers were not always in a position to be delicate about such things. Thirst often outranked germ theory. Besides, germ theory itself was still making its social journey into everyday habits. A man at the end of the bar complains that his paw is short. The bartender answers with a stare so level it might have been measured with a ruler. For a second, the air tightens. Then the customer shrugs and drinks. There it is again, that hidden discipline. Many saloons depended on the bartender's ability to enforce boundaries without turning every grievance into theatre. Tone mattered, timing mattered, public embarrassment could provoke, private firmness could settle. It was social engineering conducted with a bottle in one hand and a rag in the other. You inhale and catch the layered scent nearest the counter. Raw spirits, lemon peel from somewhere unexpected, tobacco smoke, damp wool, a touch of soap, the metallic note of coins, warm wood polish. It is not one smell, but a crowded agreement among smells, and the bar is the place where they gather most thickly. This is the room reduced to essence. Another order is called, 2 beers, 1 whiskey, a cigar. The bartender repeats it back, already reaching. That repetition prevents disputes and lets customers hear themselves as patrons of consequence. Small courtesies matter in rough settings. They lend shape to exchange. Even the slide of a glass across polished wood has style when done by practiced hands. The motion is smooth, controlled, and just showy enough to amuse without risking waste. Nobody here would call it choreography, but the body knows when it is watching skill. Some scholars debate how much Eastern bar culture influenced Western technique, because bartending manuals circulated during the 19th century, yet local adaptation was always strong. The saloon in a boom town could mimic urban trends one year and revert to blunt practicality the next if supply lines shifted or clientele changed. The bar, like the frontier itself, was never one fixed thing. It borrowed, improvised, and adjusted to the people leaning on it. A customer leaves behind a wet ring and a half-finished story. Another replaces him within moments. That is the bar's strange continuity. Individuals come and go, but the counter remains the steady witness. It receives coins from hopeful hands and tired ones. It hears lies, jokes, negotiations, flirtations, and muttered prayers disguised as complaints. It bears the weight of forearms, hats, and small bad decisions. The room may seem noisy and loose, but here at the bar its life organizes itself into a series of repeated acts. Order a drink, pay what you can, speak if spoken to, keep your balance, read the room, take your place. Standing there, You realize the long bar ritual is not grand, and that is exactly why it matters. It turns a rough public room into something almost ceremonial through repetition alone. Wood, glass, metal, memory, and human habit combine to make a frontier institution feel inevitable. The counter does not judge. It records. It supports. It separates thirst from relief by only a few inches. In a land full of distance, that is no small service. You leave the comfort of the bar and drift toward the tables, where the room tightens into concentration. The noise changes here, at the counter. Voices rise and scatter, and around the gaming tables they gather low and close, like heat around a stove. You hear the soft drag of cards across felt or bare wood, the dry shake of dice in a cup, the tiny metallic tap of coins stacked and restacked by nervous fingers. Boots still scrape the floor. Glasses still clink somewhere behind you. Yet the centre of attention has shifted. Here, every sound seems attached to consequence. A green baize table would be ideal. And some saloons did have one, especially in richer towns, eager to present a proper gambling room. Others made do with whatever surface could hold cards, elbows, and suspicion. This table bears scratches near the edges and a polish rubbed thin where hands have worried at the grain. It smells faintly of tobacco smoke and old varnish. One corner carries a ring left by a careless glass, because vice and housekeeping do not always travel together. 4 men sit around the table now, though others stand behind them in loose semicircles, watching with studied indifference that fools nobody. Spectators are part of the theatre. They pretend to be casual while noting every twitch, every bluff, every lucky turn. A gambling table is one of the few places in the saloon where silence can grow heavy enough to feel like fabric. Even the loudest room eventually makes space for suspense. The dealer's hands are the first thing you notice. Clean nails, quick fingers, no wasted motion. Cards snap together with a neat whisper as he shuffles. He does not flourish them for applause. That would look too eager. Instead, the deck moves with mechanical confidence, and that calmness is part of the performance. A good gambler tried to appear almost bored. Boredom suggested mastery. Excitement suggested risk, and risk was better advertised to other people. Poker, in its many variations, became deeply associated with the American West. Though not every table was playing the same rules in the same years, faro was enormously popular in many saloons too, often more so than later myth would admit. Historians still argue over which games dominated particular regions and decades, because memory, literature, and film have favoured poker so heavily that they sometimes flatten the richer landscape of gambling culture. Reality, as usual, refused to pick a single icon for our convenience. At this table, the men are playing poker. One rests his thumb along the edge of his cards with the tenderness of a man touching a fragile promise. Another drums once on the tabletop, then stops, aware that even small habits can give away nerves. The third keeps his hat low and his face blank. The fourth, a ranch hand by the look of his weathered cuffs, tries for a loose grin that arrives a little too often. You do not need to know the exact cards to understand the room. Confidence is being manufactured in real time. You stand just behind an older spectator whose coat smells of smoke, leather, and outdoor dust. He says nothing for a while, then mutters under his breath that the young fellow on the left is bluffing again. The remark floats into the air like a private prayer. Nobody answers. Advice from the rail is unwelcome unless specifically requested, and even then it can be unwise. In a saloon card game, information is currency, and unsolicited charity may be treated as theft. Coins lie in stacks near each player. Silver glints under the lamps. A few folded notes sit pinned beneath a glass. Sometimes chips were used in gambling houses with greater organization, but cash and coin remained common in many places, especially where directness was valued and trust only went so far. Seeing real money on the table altered the mood. It made every gesture heavier. A card was never just paper. It was flour, rent, feed, pride, travel money, and occasionally tomorrow's bad excuse. The dealer lays down another card. One player inhales through his nose, another scratches his jaw and checks his expression too late, which is almost charming. People in stories either possess legendary poker faces or crumble instantly. Real life preferred subtler failures. A shoulder stiffens. A hand hovers a second too long. A man who has been speaking easily all evening goes strangely silent. You begin to understand why gambling fascinated frontier audiences. It transformed the ordinary body into a field of clues. The touch of the table edge under your fingertips feels cool and slightly sticky where spilled beer has dried into a fine tackiness. The air here is warmer than near the door, held in place by bodies leaning inward. Smoke drifts above the players in pale ribbons. Somebody has set a cigar in the tray and forgotten it while thinking too hard. Ash lengthens dangerously. The pianist in the corner continues a tune, but softer now in your awareness, because the rhythm of the game has taken over. A player opens with a modest bet. Another matches. The hat brim tilts lower. The ranch hand studies his cards as though they might improve under sympathy. Then comes the raise. It is not dramatic. It is almost casual, and that is why it works. Men around the table shift slightly, boots adjusting under chairs, elbows settling more firmly. Money does not need to shout to command attention. You think of the legends of frontier gamblers in tailored vests, sleeve garters, diamond stick pins, and miraculous nerves. Some certainly cultivated that image. Professional gamblers often dressed with care because appearance itself was a weapon. Clean linen, polished boots, and a composed manner suggested skill, success, and perhaps a dangerous intimacy with probability. It was branding before the modern world gave everything a seminar and a slogan. Yet many card players in saloons were not glamorous professionals at all. They were workers with pay in pocket, men chasing excitement after long days, travellers passing time, and locals hoping chance might briefly improve on labour. That hope is easy to read on their faces. Gambling in the saloon was not merely greed, it was a release from routine, a contest that rewarded wit as much as luck, and a structured form of risk in a world already saturated with unstructured risk. On the frontier, weather could ruin you. Illness could ruin you. A failed claim, a lame horse, a delayed shipment, or one terrible season could do the same. Cards offered a risk you could at least sit down with, look in the eye, and call by name. That had its appeal. The dealer's cuff brushes the table with a dry whisper. Another round begins. This time the ranch hand grows bolder and pushes in more coin than before. The older spectator beside you gives the slightest snort. Confidence, you are learning, is one of the most expensive habits in the room. Not every game was honest. That is one fact nobody in the saloon forgets, even if no one says it too loudly. Marked cards, stacked decks, false shuffles, hidden cards up sleeves, signals between partners, loaded dice, all were part of gambling lore and sometimes part of gambling reality. Saloon players lived in a state of permanent mild suspicion. You watch the dealer's wrists, the placement of the deck, the cut, the distribution. So does everyone else. Trust exists here, but only in guarded teaspoonfuls. A quirky tidbit lingers around Faro, one of the 19th century's favourite gambling games. It was common enough that specialised dealing boxes were used, and the house often took a cut through the bank rather than playing as just another gambler. Faro tables moved money quickly and drew crowds because the game was fast and easy to follow. Yet it also inspired endless accusations of cheating, especially when luck turned sour, which it so often does at exactly the wrong moment. People are remarkably philosophical while winning. At a smaller table nearby, two men are playing dice with a cup worn smooth by use. The rattle of it is instantly recognisable and oddly thrilling, like a tiny storm trapped in wood and leather. Dice games carried a more open kind of nerve. Cards let you hide behind a face. Dice toss the whole matter into public view. The cup lifts, the dice tumble, and for 1 second everybody sees fate in plain sight. It is a very efficient drama. One die bounces off the table edge, hits the floor and rolls toward a chair leg. 3 men instinctively track it with their eyes. The final number seems to matter to the whole room. Then comes laughter, a groan, and a demand for another round. So much frontier entertainment lived in this narrow band between mathematics and emotion. You notice something else here. The spectators are almost as interesting as the players. One man watches with folded arms and the serene expression of a church usher, though his eyes move like a hawk's. Another pretends to be more interested in his cigar than the cards, but his ears lean forward before the rest of him does. A third keeps count under his breath, lips barely moving. Saloons taught people to observe. Entertainment was participatory even when it looked passive. A waitress passes with a tray and the players briefly sit back to make room. The smell of beer and whiskey sweeps through the warm air. Glasses settle beside elbows. A man takes a drink without looking away from the table. That, too, is a frontier skill. Hydration with menace. You almost admire it. The game sharpens. One player folds, another stays in. The ranch hand swallows and tries not to. The man in the low hat finally speaks, asking in a tone dry as paper whether everyone feels lucky or merely optimistic. A few nearby listeners smile. Gentle sarcasm thrives best when nerves are under strain. It relieves pressure without entirely releasing it. Scholars continue debating how much of Western gambling culture was genuinely distinct from older American and European traditions, and how much was simply transplanted and adapted under frontier conditions. The games themselves often had long histories elsewhere. What changed in the West was the atmosphere around them: distance, mobility, unstable fortunes, and the concentrated mix of strangers gave gambling a sharper social edge. A card table in a frontier saloon could bring together men who shared no class, language, or background except the willingness to hazard something. One of the players calls the bet. There it is. No trumpet, no thunder, just a few words and the immediate tightening of every spine in range. Cards are laid down in sequence. The reveal is almost disappointingly plain after so much tension. Then the winner is clear. Coin moves across the table with a clean metallic scrape. The ranch hand exhales once and leans back as though struck by invisible weather. He masks it quickly, but not quickly enough. Loss at a card table carried its own etiquette. Curse too much and you look childish. Accept defeat too calmly and you may seem false. The ideal posture was weary amusement, as if losing a handful of wages were merely one of a life's routine inconveniences, like bad coffee or a stubborn mule. Men practiced that expression a lot. The West gave them ample opportunity. The winner gathers the money with restraint. He does not grin broadly, which would tempt resentment. He merely stacks the coins, squares the edges with careful fingertips, and orders another drink in a voice that says the evening remains ordinary. This studied moderation is one of the great survival techniques of saloon life. Triumph must be dressed modestly if you want to keep all your teeth and perhaps your chair. The dealer resets the deck. Cards are shuffled again. Already the last loss is being translated into the logic of the next hand. That is gambling spell. It persuades the defeated that the future may correct the insult of the past if only they remained seated. A frontier saloon, built on repetition and appetite, was the perfect habitat for such thinking. You drift toward the dice table for a closer look. The cup is leather-covered, frayed near the rim. The man shaking it closes his fist tight and gives it a practiced roll. The sound is lovely in a way, crisp and hollow, full of possibility. He slams it down, lifts it, and lets fortune speak in small white cubes with black points. The men around him react instantly, not only to the result, but to the courage of having risked it before witnesses. Unlike cards, dice leave less room for long acting. Their honesty is brutal, even when the people handling them are not. Loaded dice existed, certainly, and skilled manipulators could influence outcomes more than the innocent preferred to believe. Yet the visual simplicity of the throw gave dice games a raw public energy. Hope flew through the air and landed where it landed. Nobody had to interpret a bluff afterward. A laugh erupts from the table. Warm and genuine this time. One man has won just enough to feel transformed. He slaps a friend on the shoulder hard enough to spill a few drops from a nearby glass. Success has expanded his body. Defeat had earlier shrunk the ranch hands. Gambling reshapes posture almost faster than alcohol does. You begin to see why saloons and games belong together so naturally. Both offered controlled uncertainty. Both let ordinary people perform stronger, luckier, sharper versions of themselves for an hour or two. Both depended on reading a room. At the card table, a man could reinvent his standing with a single hand or expose his foolishness with equal speed. It was social theatre priced by the round. The lamp above the table hums faintly. Smoke circles in the heat. Cards whisper, dice clatter, coins scrape wood. A chair creaks under someone leaning too far. The air smells of wool coats, lamp oil, tobacco, and that faint metallic scent money seems to acquire in warm hands. Your own pulse has matched the rhythm without permission. Here in the gaming corner, the saloon feels less like a drinking room and more like a small laboratory of risk. Nerves, vanity, patience, luck, deception, courage, and boredom all sit down together and ask for one more hand. Some men will leave lighter in the pocket, a few will leave heavier, most will leave with a story adjusted in their favour. Yet for the length of a game, under low lamps and many watching eyes, chance itself becomes a companion at the table, and nobody in the room can resist glancing its way. You turn from the tables and let your ears lead you across the room. That is the funny thing about a saloon. You can understand half of it with your eyes, but the other half arrives through sound. Music drifts over everything like a loose cover thrown across a cluttered bed. It does not erase the noise underneath. It gathers it. Boots, laughter, chairs, glass, muttered arguments, cards snapping shut, someone coughing near the stove, someone else calling for another round. All of it folds into the tune until the room feels less chaotic than layered. The piano stands against the wall with confidence that exceeds its condition. One leg has probably been shimmed. The finish is dull where sleeves and elbows have brushed it for years. Candle wax or a lamp soot has marked the top in faint stains. A mug rests there too, because in a saloon even the instruments are expected to endure refreshment. The keys are not perfectly even. A few have yellowed. Yet when the player leans in and begins, the whole room subtly adjusts its breathing. The tune is lively without being refined. It has bounce. It has repetition. It has just enough cheer to keep spirits moving without demanding deep attention from men who are already working hard at drinking, gambling, flirting, or defending improbable stories. Saloon music often served precisely that purpose. It was not always a formal performance. Many times it was a practical tool for atmosphere, a way to fill pauses before they turned awkward and to lift the energy before it sagged into melancholy. Human beings are much easier to manage when given rhythm. The pianist himself looks like a man employed by both music and fatigue. His sleeves are rolled, his collar has surrendered any hope of the day ending crisp. His fingers move with competent speed, though not with the grand delicacy of a concert hall. That is not a criticism, it is admiration. Playing in a saloon demanded resilience more than purity. You had to keep going while people talked over you, laughed at the wrong moments, spilled beer nearby, requested songs you hated, and perhaps leaned on the instrument to emphasize jokes. It was art under mild assault. You notice how often the tune changes with the room rather than with any official schedule. A card game tightens, and the pianist softens to a jaunty background murmur. A group by the bar grows louder, and he answers with more volume, as if defending the floorboards from silence. Someone starts singing badly, and he either supports them out of mercy or plows ahead until the interruption dies of embarrassment. Music here is social navigation. A fiddle would sometimes join in when available, so might a banjo, guitar, flute, cornet, or whatever instrument a town could produce along with a person sober enough to operate it. The frontier was not musically barren. It was musically improvised. Songs travelled with migrants, soldiers, labourers, immigrants, and performers. Ballads from the British Isles, dance tunes from continental Europe, minstrel numbers, sentimental parlour songs, comic pieces, patriotic favourites, spirituals, Mexican influences, and locally adapted melodies all found their way into Western soundscapes. The saloon became one of the places where these currents met without asking permission from a conservatory. The smell near the piano is a little different from the rest of the room. Less raw whiskey, more warm wood, lamp oil, dust caught in upholstery, and a trace of perfume from somebody who passed recently. You rest a hand on the back of an empty chair and feel the polished surface sticky in one spot, worn smooth in another. The room's noise presses gently against your skin. A laugh breaks out near the far wall. Someone stamps a boot in time with the tune. The floor answers with a hollow thud. Entertainment in a saloon could be loose and intermittent, but it mattered deeply. Frontier life could be repetitive, lonely, and physically exhausting. A long cattle drive, a mining camp, railroad labour, clerking in a wind-blown town. All of it left people hungry for diversion that felt communal. Music gave shape to an evening. It transformed drinking from mere consumption into occasion. Even men who claimed not to care about songs would subtly relax when the right tune began. The shoulders lowered, the jaw unclenched. A face previously arranged into stern indifference softened around the eyes. A singer steps forward now, not onto a grand stage, because most saloons did not possess anything so dignified, but into a patch of room that becomes a stage by social agreement. She wears a dress chosen to catch the light, not necessarily with expensive materials, but with smart use of colour and trim. Her voice rises clear enough to cut through the room. For a moment the nearby conversations falter. It is not reverence exactly. It is recalibration. A human voice has entered the contest. She sings with projection rather than subtlety, because subtlety would lose the battle against glassware and men with opinions. The song is familiar to several listeners, and by the second line a few mouths begin shaping the words. Not everyone joins in. Some simply listen. A man near you, who looked built entirely of rope and dust a moment ago, now gazes toward the singer with such naked homesickness on his face that the sight almost startles you. Music does that. It sneaks past the frontier pose and finds whatever softer room a person has hidden. Old songs carried memory better than conversation. A tune could take a man back to a boarding house in St. Louis, a farm kitchen in Ohio, a crowded port, a chapel, a mother humming while mending, a dance in a town long left behind. The West was full of movement. People crossed huge distances and lost much that was familiar on the way. Songs were portable belongings. A melody asked no freight fee and took very little packing. Some saloons offered more organised entertainment than others. In larger towns and boom places, variety could be impressive. Singers, comic performers, dancers, instrumentalists, magicians, blackface acts in the ugly conventions of the time, touring troupes, and local amateurs might all appear depending on the clientele and the owner's ambitions. Historians still argue over how polished such entertainment really was in many smaller Western saloons, because the record varies sharply by region, decade, and town size. Yet there is little doubt that performance mattered. Where people gathered nightly, somebody would eventually step forward to sing, play, joke, recite, or dance. A quirky detail from the period makes you smile a little. Some piano players became experts at continuing through near disaster, treating broken strings, rowdy interruptions, or thrown remarks as merely part of the arrangement. Popular memory loves the image of a pianist calmly playing while a fight erupts nearby. That image is exaggerated for drama, of course, but it survives because it contains a truth. Saloon musicians often learn to preserve atmosphere under absurd conditions. Professional composure can look a lot like courage when seen through lamp smoke. The singer finishes to a scatter of applause, a few whistles, and one overly enthusiastic shout that causes immediate teasing from 3 directions. She gives a small nod that acknowledges appreciation without inviting nonsense. Then the pianist rolls into another tune before the room can sag. Timing is everything. Dead air in a saloon could turn reflective, and reflection was not always good for business. Better to keep feet tapping and glasses lifting. At a side table, 2 men are trying to sing harmony and failing in opposite directions. Their effort is earnest enough to be endearing. One is low and late. The other is high and confident in ways unsupported by evidence. Yet nobody seems offended. Communal music in such places was not judged by perfection. It was judged by usefulness. Did it lighten the room? Did it turn strangers into a temporary chorus? Did it give lonely men something to do with their mouths besides complain? If so, it had succeeded. A dance starts near the centre, informal at first. Just a few pairs and a couple of brave solo stomps. Space is negotiated quickly. Chairs scrape back. A table is shifted. Boots begin striking the floor with more purpose. The sound changes again. Now rhythm rises through the planks themselves. You can feel it faintly through your soles. A steady pulse like the room has found a second heartbeat. Dust stirs from the floorboards and catches the lamplight in pale swirls. A laugh rings out bright and unguarded. The touch of the air becomes warmer with movement. Wool sleeves brush past. A skirt hem whispers near a chair leg. Someone smells of bay rum, someone else of sweat and soap, another of cigar smoke so strong it seems almost visible. Entertainment was never separate from the body in a saloon. You did not sit in respectful rows facing a distant stage. You felt the performance moving among elbows, boots, breath, and spilled drink. It was public intimacy of a rough but effective kind. Of course, not everyone came for music. Some barely hear it. A gambler remains deep in his cards. A businessman by the wall keeps talking figures with a partner, even while the singer holds a long note. A man at the bar stares into his whiskey with the concentration of a philosopher who has recently misplaced the important part of his philosophy. Yet even those who seem detached are altered by the sound around them. Music sets the emotional weather whether people admit it or not. It also smooths social edges. A room divided by occupation, language, money, and a mood can be drawn briefly into one atmosphere by a tune everybody knows. Not always, and not perfectly, but enough. A chorus offers participation without confession. Men who would never discuss grief aloud might sing of lost love at full volume after 2 drinks and call it entertainment. That loophole has served humanity for centuries. The pianist shifts to a sentimental air. The tempo slows. The room softens with it. Conversations lower. Even the clink of glass seems gentler. You can almost hear the grain of the wood around you settling into the melody. A lamp flickers once. Beyond the windows, the night has deepened, but inside the saloon the glow feels suspended, protective in its own imperfect way. This is one of the least flashy truths about such places. They offered not only stimulation but shelter from emptiness. Noise can be a form of comfort. So can shared listening. The singer returns for another number, and this one earns real attention. It tells of distance, devotion, and foolish men, which gives nearly everyone present at least one point of recognition. Gentle laughter rises in the right places. A hand taps the table in rhythm. Somebody near the stove wipes an eye and then pretends to be adjusting smoke. No one calls him on it. The room has manners in strange corners. There were darker sides to entertainment too. Some performances traded in racial caricature, humiliation, an exploitative display that reflected the prejudices of the period. A truthful picture of saloon culture cannot ignore that ugliness. Public amusement has often borrowed too easily from cruelty. The frontier did not invent that habit, but it certainly participated in it. The same room that offered companionship and relief could also echo with mockery and exclusion. Even so, the human need beneath the noise remains plain. People gathered because isolation weighs heavily, especially in places built quickly, worked hard, and peopled by transients. Music stitched temporary communities. A chorus lasted only a few lines, a dance only a few minutes, but that was enough to make the night feel shared rather than merely endured. The saloon did not cure loneliness, it interrupted it. A man beside you knocks his knuckles softly against the back of the chair in time with the beat. He does not seem aware he is doing it. Across the room, the pianist grins at some private joke and pushes the tempo higher. Boots answer. A server slips between dancers with astonishing balance, keeping her tray level while avoiding heels and elbows. Someone cheers when a fiddler suddenly joins in from the side, adding a sharper ribbon of sound over the piano's sturdy backbone. The whole room brightens. You realize then that entertainment in a saloon is not a separate event placed on top of ordinary life. It is how ordinary life becomes bearable, then festive, then memorable. It carries labour out of the body for a little while. It gives the lonely something to join, the tired something to follow, the boastful something to sing over, and the homesick something to hold. Music does not civilize the saloon exactly. That would be too neat. But it does humanize it, and that may be the more important miracle. The final chord of the tune lands with a cheerful firmness. Applause scatters across the room like thrown coins, uneven but heartfelt. Laughter follows. Another order is called. Chairs settle. Boots stop dancing and resume standing. Yet the atmosphere remains changed. The room feels looser now, warmer, almost companionable in its rough frontier fashion. You stand there in the lamplit hum, breathing smoke, wood, perfume, and beer. While the piano takes a brief breath before beginning again, and you understand why so many remembered the sound long after the drinks were forgotten, you begin to notice what the room has trained many people not to notice properly. Women are here, but not as simple decoration, not as a painted blur at the edge of a man's story, and not as a single type that can be summed up with a wink and a dusty cliché. The saloon asks for female labour in many forms, then allows legend to blur those forms together until everything looks easier, flatter, and more scandalous than it really was. The truth, like most truths worth keeping, is more crowded. A woman moves between tables with a tray balanced on one hand and an expression that says she has measured everyone already. Her dress is tidy, chosen for durability as much as appearance. Her sleeves are practical. Her hair is pinned with care, because presentation matters in a room where every glance tries to assign meaning. She does not drift. She works. The floorboards answer under her shoes with a quick sequence of soft taps as she slips around chairs and boots and elbows that seem to expand whenever a tray appears. You can tell within moments that this job demands much more than carrying drinks. She has to remember orders in a room where several men will insist they asked for something else. She has to smile enough to encourage tips without letting that smile be mistaken for invitation. She has to assess who is merely noisy, who is growing sentimental, who is about to become grabby, and who might need to be quietly ignored until his confidence tires itself out. She must keep moving, keep judging, keep balancing glass and mood at the same time. It is hospitality sharpened into survival. The smell around her is a different layer of the saloon. There is soap, starch, a trace of perfume, perhaps inexpensive but carefully applied. It cuts through tobacco and stale beer for an instant, then disappears again into the warm air. That brief freshness is almost startling in the crowded room. It reminds you that people here are making deliberate efforts to present themselves against the odds. Respectability in a frontier town was often an active daily construction, not a settled state. Popular memory loves to flatten saloon women into one category, usually the so-called saloon girl, as if every woman in the room exists only to laugh brightly, flirt freely, and glide beside the piano under a cloud of male fantasy. Some did sing, some danced, some encouraged customers to buy drinks, some sold companionship in ways that crossed into sex work. But many women connected to saloons did something broader and more complicated. They served tables, kept accounts, performed music, tended bar, managed boarding arrangements, cleaned rooms, cooked meals, or worked in family-run establishments where the business blurred into domestic labour. A saloon could be a workplace, not just a spectacle. A singer near the piano adjusts the cuff of one glove while waiting for her turn. She's composed, self-aware, and careful with her posture. Men look at her, certainly. That is part of the arrangement. But you sense she's looking back just as critically. Performance gave some women a way to earn money, shape attention, and negotiate status in places where respectable employment could be limited or poorly paid. That did not make the work safe. It made it strategic. She begins to sing, and the room changes around her. The men at the nearest table lower their voices. One turns fully toward the piano. Another pretends not to, which fools nobody. Her voice is strong enough to hold the room, but never too delicate for it. Saloon audiences were not patient with fragility. A performer needed projection, timing, and emotional intelligence. She had to know when to be playful, when to be wistful, when to leave a line hanging just long enough for applause, and when to cut a number short before attention wandered toward cards or argument. You watch the crowd watching her, and the social complexity becomes clearer. Admiration mixes with objectification. Respect mixes with entitlement. Curiosity mixes with projection. She's both worker and symbol in the minds around her, and that tension follows nearly every woman in the room. Men bring their own stories about what she must be, what she must want, what her smile means, what her presence grants them permission to imagine. She, meanwhile, is earning money inside those assumptions while trying not to be crushed by them. It is a skill set history rarely bothers to admire properly. A waitress reaches for empty glasses at your table and draws her arm back just in time to avoid a hand that lingers too boldly near her wrist. She does not flinch. She shifts her tray, looks directly at the offender, and says something low enough that you cannot hear it, but sharp enough that he withdraws and laughs too loudly afterward. There it is again, that hidden labour, boundary setting without spectacle, self-protection disguised as routine. The room keeps moving, but a small battle has been fought and won. Historians still disagree about the exact social status of many women who worked in and around Western saloons, partly because the historical record often reflects male assumptions more than female realities. Newspaper accounts sensationalized, moral reformers generalized, later storytellers romanticized. Some women were indeed engaged in prostitution, either within saloons or in nearby rooms and districts. Others were not. The categories could overlap, shift, or be imposed unfairly from the outside. A woman serving drinks might be treated as suspect regardless of her actual work, simply because she occupied public space among men. Respectability, especially for women, was often judged harshly and unevenly. The room carries that judgment in invisible ways. A respectable town lady might never enter a saloon at all, at least not publicly, because the setting itself could stain reputation. Yet women still had economic reasons to cross such thresholds. In boom towns, mining camps, railroad settlements, and cattle towns, the demand for female labour in male-dominated environments could be high, even as moral scrutiny remained relentless. That contradiction sat at the centre of many women's lives in the West. Opportunity came with risk, attached like a second hem. A quirky detail survives in some accounts. Certain saloons encouraged female employees to persuade customers to buy them drinks, but the women's glasses might contain tea, coloured water, or very weak alcohol so they could continue working, while the men paid full price for the privilege of attention. It was a tidy little business innovation, equal parts theatre and accounting. The frontier did appreciate a clever margin. You move closer to the side of the room where conversation is easier to hear between songs. Two women speak briefly near a doorway, not in the bright tones they use for customers, but in the flatter, more efficient rhythm of co-workers. One asks about a missing tray cloth. The other mentions a man at the far table who should be watched. Then they split apart again, each returning to her role. That exchange is strangely grounding. It cuts through myth at once. These are workers coordinating a shift. The surfaces around them tell their own story. The back of a chair rubbed smooth by many hands, a counter edge cool under the fingertips, a glass damp with condensation or fresh rinsing, the fabric of a sleeve brushing past your coat, the heat near the lamps, the uneven floor that requires balance learned through repetition. Female labour in the saloon was intensely physical. It involved carrying, standing, dodging, turning, calculating, smiling, refusing, and restarting the whole process within seconds. A woman behind a side counter is making change and keeping a small notebook. Her mouth tightens slightly each time a customer tries charm in place of money. Numbers give her no romance. She flips pages, moistens a fingertip, marks a line, closes the book, and looks up already prepared for the next request. Businesswomen existed throughout the West, including in entertainment and drinking establishments, though later legend often pushed them into shadow. Owners, widows, boarding house operators, madams, cooks, laundresses, and managers all shaped these economies. A saloon was not always controlled by the men making the loudest noise in it. The singer finishes her number and accepts applause with a nod that is gracious but measured. She does not gush. That reserve matters. Too much warmth may invite assumptions she cannot afford. Too much coolness may cost earnings. The line between approachability and authority is narrow, and she walks it like a practiced performer on a rough stage. A man calls for an encore in a tone meant to sound playful. She answers with a glance that weighs his manners, then gives him the next song on her own terms. A small victory. Elegantly delivered. You begin to understand why so many women in such spaces cultivated sharp humour. Gentle sarcasm could do the work of armour while still seeming socially acceptable. A witty answer corrected a man without forcing open conflict. A laugh at the right moment could deflect insult. A raised eyebrow could cool nonsense faster than a sermon. Verbal intelligence was not a decorative trait here. It was part of the equipment. Of course, danger remained real. Alcohol loosened restraint. Crowded rooms reduced personal space. The legal system offered uneven protection, especially to women whose respectability had already been questioned by where they worked. Some saloons had owners or bartenders who intervened quickly to protect employees because disorder was bad for business. Others were far less reliable. Safety often depended on alliances, local reputation, and personal acuity rather than any stable rule. That uncertainty hums under the room even when the music is bright. The atmosphere near the piano is warmer now. More bodies gathered, more perfume mingling with cigar smoke, more fabric brushing wood and leather. One dancer laughs as she spins out of a partner's reach, then checks that movement before it tips from controlled charm into vulnerability. Another woman at a table hears a joke, smiles professionally, and lets the smile fall the instant she turns away. Such tiny shifts reveal more than grand speeches ever could. Public femininity in the saloon was often a sequence of rapid adjustments between performed ease and inward caution. Scholars also continue debating how much freedom saloon work provided compared with other frontier occupations available to women. The answer is simplicity. Wages could be better than domestic service, laundry, or sewing. Visibility could create leverage, contacts, and a degree of independence, yet the cost might be heavy in scrutiny, harassment, instability, and damaged reputation. Opportunity and exploitation frequently traveled together. The West did not separate them neatly. At a nearby table, a man attempts courtly charm with such labour that the effort becomes almost touching. He straightens his vest, offers to buy a drink, and speaks with the solemnity of a diplomat negotiating a treaty. The woman receiving this performance listens, amused but unmoved. She's heard every variation. When she answers, her tone is pleasant, but she guides the exchange back toward business within seconds. That economy of control is impressive. She can redirect fantasy into revenue without ever saying the rude truth aloud. You noticed, too, that not all women here are performers or servers. One sits with a man who may be a husband, brother, or employer. Another older woman near the back seems involved in the practical management of the place, speaking briefly with the bartender, checking a shelf, then disappearing through a door with the authority of someone who knows where the good linens are hidden and who has been wasting candles. Family-run saloons did exist, especially in smaller towns where business categories were less neatly separated than later memory suggests. Public and private life often shared walls. The sounds around you continue in layers. Piano keys, low conversation, a tray set down, coins counted, someone laughing with more whiskey than wisdom in it, the singer clearing her throat before another song, the rustle of skirts, the hollow knock of chair legs over planks. All of it forms a social soundscape in which female presence is not incidental, it is structural. Without women, many saloons would have lost labour, music, atmosphere, and a significant part of their customer appeal. Yet the same culture that relied on that presence often refused to grant it full dignity. That contradiction is perhaps the truest thing in the room. The Old West Saloon was not a stage populated only by swaggering men and one-dimensional women. It was a workplace where women navigated money, danger, performance, judgment, and opportunity with exhausting intelligence. Some used charm as craft, some used distance, some sang, some served, some counted receipts, some endured gossip from people who depended on their labour while condemning it. Few had the luxury of being simple symbols. They had to be quick, observant, and durable, often all in the same hour. As the next song begins, one waitress glides past with a tray of fresh glasses, the lamp glow catching the curve of each rim. Her expression is calm, but her eyes are alert. She smells faintly of starch and tobacco smoke now, the room having claimed her for the evening. She turns sideways to avoid a chair, pivots around a man rising too fast, and reaches the table without spilling a drop. It is a small act, almost invisible unless you care to see it. That is what so much of women's work in the saloon was like, skilled, constant, and half hidden beneath the louder legends of the West. You begin to see that the room is not nearly as lawless as it first pretends. At a glance, the saloon looks improvised. Men crowd the bar in uneven lines. Laughter rises too loudly from one table and dies too quickly at another. Smoke drifts wherever it likes. Cards appear, coins disappear, Boots cross paths, chairs scrape back, and the whole place seems to run on appetite alone. But if you stay long enough, a hidden structure emerges. The saloon survives because somebody, somewhere in it, is always keeping count. Order lives here in ordinary habits rather than grand announcements. You notice it in the way newcomers pause before choosing a place to stand. You notice it in the way regulars leave just enough room at the bar for certain men but not for others. You notice it in the quick glance traded between bartender and server when a customer begins speaking with too much confidence and too little balance. Every room like this develops its own internal code. It may never be written down. It may change from town to town, owner to owner, even season to season. Yet without it, the glasses would shatter faster than the profits could recover. The first rule is simple: spend or move along. A man who orders drinks, tips modestly, minds his own business, and causes no expensive trouble is useful to the house. A man who loiters without buying, quarrels endlessly, paws the staff, or blocks traffic at the counter becomes a burden. Saloons sold atmosphere, but atmosphere had costs. Lamp oil cost money. Wood for the stove cost money. Bottles, kegs, cards, food, wages, rent, repairs, all of it added up. The room could not afford too many freeloaders wrapped in swagger. Even vice needed bookkeeping. The bartender enforces much of this without speeches. He serves one man quickly. He leaves another waiting just long enough to make a point. He asks for payment before pouring when trust is thin. He glances toward the door when a customer has exhausted goodwill and coin in equal measure. In a better-run saloon, authority is exercised in inches. The goal is not spectacle. The goal is flow. A smooth room earns more than a dramatic one. Near the entrance, you notice a quiet custom. Several men check their weapons, not with a formal posted sign in every case, but by habit, local pressure, or simple recognition that this house prefers fewer surprises. The image of every frontier saloon packed wall to wall with armed men waiting for an excuse is exaggerated. In some towns, ordinances restricted carrying weapons in certain public spaces. In others, proprietors set their own rules. Enforcement varied, naturally. So did compliance. But many business owners had no wish to host disputes at muzzle level if they could help it. Historians still debate how consistently weapon rules were enforced across the West, because law on paper and habit in practice were often two very different creatures. A town might pass an ordinance against carrying firearms, then apply it unevenly depending on politics, personality, or the number of friends a man had nearby. Yet the very existence of such rules tells you something important. Even people living in the rough conditions did not necessarily want roughness wandering freely between tables. A heavy peg rail by the wall holds coats and hats, and perhaps on some nights a holster or rifle kept out of easy reach. The arrangement is not perfect. Nothing here is perfect. Still, it reflects a desire to lower the room's temperature before it boils. Civilization on the frontier was often less a triumph than a series of practical nudges against chaos. You see another rule at work in how men choose their words. Insults are not impossible. This is not a monastery, but they are often shaped carefully, padded with humour, or delivered in tones that leave room for retreat. A skilled customer can say something cutting while still offering the other man a ladder down. That is social intelligence born of necessity. In a crowded saloon, pride is abundant and private space is scarce. If every slight were answered as fully as offended vanity preferred, nobody would make it through the week with intact furniture. Gentle sarcasm becomes one of the room's safety valves. A man teases instead of accusing. Another shrugs instead of escalating. Laughter does what fists might otherwise attempt. Not always, of course. Some men are too drunk, too aggrieved, or too eager to perform toughness for an audience. But most evenings depend on the fact that people understand the cost of pushing too far. At a nearby table, one fellow complains that his beer is flat and his luck flatter. His companion replies that the house cannot be blamed for acts of providence. The first man grumbles. The second keeps a straight face just long enough to let the joke land. The table laughs. Complaint dissolved. Small peace restored. You could almost call it diplomacy if diplomacy smelled more strongly of tobacco. The servers work inside this system too. They know which tables can be trusted to settle up promptly. They know who tips in coin and who tips in promises. They know which men respond to firmness and which must be handled with a brighter tone to avoid needless friction. Their routes through the room are not random. They are adjusted constantly according to mood, crowding, and risk. Even the angle at which a tray approaches a table can reflect experience. Too close, and a wandering hand may try its luck. Too distant, and you cannot hear the order above the noise. Survival often looks like choreography. The owner, if present, may sit near the back or circulate in a deceptively casual manner, speaking little while missing almost nothing. Some proprietors cultivated geniality. Others relied on reputation alone. A saloon keeper had to judge when to intervene personally and when to let staff manage. Too much interference could make the house look unstable. Too little could invite chaos. It was a balancing act performed under lamp smoke and public scrutiny. A quirky custom in certain Western drinking places involved setting informal house expectations about buying rounds. Refusing to join in at the wrong moment could mark a man as stingy or unfriendly. But overenthusiastic generosity could be read as showing off or trying to buy influence. The trick was proportion. Buy enough to seem decent, not enough to seem desperate. The frontier, for all its myths of bluntness, was crowded with delicate social mathematics. You start noticing how the room places itself. A loud drunk near the stove gets gently redirected by two companions before his voice spreads further than his breath. A gambler at the far table is reminded very quietly that accusations of cheating should come with evidence or not at all. A newcomer who wanders too close to a private conversation receives one cool look and immediately finds interest elsewhere. No sheriff steps in, no bell rings. The social fabric tightens and releases on its own. The saloon depends on this self-regulation because outside authority cannot manage every minute, and inside authority prefers not to. The floor under your boots feels tacky in patches where old spills have settled into the grain. Warm air presses against your collar. A lamp hums above you with a faint insect-like buzz. Somewhere behind the bar, glass meets glass in a neat, quick knock. The sensory clutter could suggest disorder, yet the room's rhythms are remarkably disciplined. Drinks move in patterns. Voices rise and fall in waves. People make room when someone carrying a tray approaches. Chairs shift back just enough. Elbows tuck inward at the right moment. Shared space teaches manners the hard way. Food, too, has its place in the hidden order. Dios. Free lunch trays encourage continued drinking. Yes, but they also slow the room's descent into pure disorder. A man with bread, pickles, and cold meat in front of him is often easier to manage than a man drinking on an empty stomach and a full grievance. Practical mercy and profit can resemble each other very closely in a saloon. You glance toward a small handwritten notice tacked near the counter. Perhaps it lists prices. Perhaps it warns against credit disputes. Perhaps it asks customers not to spit somewhere especially important. The exact wording matters less than the fact that such notices existed at all. Frontier businesses use signs, the way all businesses do when speech grows tiresome. Do not do this. Pay here. Rooms upstairs. Meals at noon. Rules are not glamorous, but they make commerce possible. The card tables carry their own code. Touch your own cards only. Keep your hands visible enough to avoid suspicion. Do not comment on another man's hand while the game is live. Pay your losses with reasonable grace. Win without gloating if you value your evening. These expectations are rarely recited in full because everybody learns them by watching who gets tolerated and who gets frozen out. The threat of exclusion is powerful in towns where companionship and diversion may already be in short supply. Scholars continue arguing about how much saloon culture shaped civic norms in developing Western towns and how much it merely reflected them. The answer is probably both. Saloons absorbed local values, then amplified or adjusted them through nightly repetition. A town that prized business respectability might cultivate more orderly establishments. A camp built fast around extraction and turnover might permit rougher conduct. Yet even the roughest places developed boundaries, because human gatherings always do. The question was never whether rules existed, it was who made them, who enforced them, and who got punished most often for breaking them. That last part matters. Rules in any public room are rarely neutral. A wealthy rancher may receive more patience than a drifter with empty pockets. A regular might get warnings where a stranger gets thrown out. A charming cheat may last longer than an honest man with a bad temper. Women working in the saloon are often expected to tolerate behavior that would get another customer ejected if directed at the owner. Power bends custom. The hidden code may keep order, but it does not distribute fairness evenly. You see this play out when a local businessman interrupts a server with one too many familiar remarks. She answers lightly, yet the bartender watches the exchange with unusual attention. Had the same words come from a poorer man, he might already be on the sidewalk. Instead, the response is measured because the offender's account is good and his connections better. There it is. Social order doing its selective work. Even so, the saloon's code protects more than profit. It protects predictability. People can endure a great deal if they believe the room's rules are legible. Trouble becomes frightening when it feels arbitrary. A known grouch is manageable. A sudden madman is not. So the saloon favors routine signals. Certain seats belong loosely to certain regulars. Certain jokes are safe with certain tables. Certain men can be interrupted. Others must be approached sideways through humor or a free cup of coffee. These nuances are learned over time and passed around without anyone pretending they are written law. The stove offers another clue to the room's structure. In cooler weather, its warmth creates a small district of its own. Older men or those with aching joints tend to settle nearby. The hotter-tempered are sometimes steered elsewhere. Proximity to heat, door, bar, tables, and piano all shape the social geography. A seat is never just a seat. It is a declaration of mood, means, and intention. A man standing near the entrance is halfway between leaving and staying. He has finished his drink, yet lingers because two conversations might still benefit him. The bartender notices and does not press. A good house understands that people need a little drift time. Rush them too hard and they resent it. Leave them too loose and they clog the room. Again, balance. A county official enters, and several faces turn just enough to mark his arrival without making him the center of gravity. The room recalibrates instantly. Politics, law, business, and pleasure overlap here more than moral reformers like to admit. The official is greeted civilly. He returns the favor. Whatever private opinions exist, the public code of the room takes precedence for now. Courtesy can be a truce disguised as manners. The smell of cigars thickens near the back. Someone opens the door, letting in a blade of cooler night air that brushes your cheek and briefly lifts the smoke toward the ceiling. The batwing doors settle. Voices resume. The room closes, ranks around itself once more. It feels almost organism-like now. Self-adjusting, protective, suspicious, efficient. That is the hidden truth of the saloon. It was not sustained by chaos, but by managed disorder. Beneath the noise lived expectation. Beneath the swagger lived caution. Beneath the image of total freedom lived a web of rules, favors, warnings, habits, and quiet corrections. The frontier could look rough because so much smoothing work happened out of sight. You stand in the middle of the warm lamplit room and listen to its coded life unfolding in jokes, glances, pauses, and measured pause, and the place begins to feel less like a riot waiting to happen, and more like what it usually had to be in order to survive a business built on appetite, kept alive by discipline no one bothered to advertise. You cannot stay in a saloon long without feeling the question hovering in the smoke. How dangerous was this place, really? The room itself encourages the myth. Low light, crowded tables, men with money in their pockets and opinions in their mouths, glass within easy throwing distance, pride under pressure, a piano trying bravely to keep civilization stitched together. It is easy to see why later storytellers fell in love with the idea of violence here. A saloon offers perfect scenery for trouble, but scenery is not the same thing as frequency, and myth has always preferred a dramatic evening to an ordinary one. The truth begins in the body. You notice how people stand, not wildly, carefully. A man leaves himself room to turn, another keeps one shoulder free. A regular chooses a place against the wall where he can see the door without making a theatrical performance of it. These are not signs that a fight is certain. They are signs that risk is acknowledged. In a world with fewer formal protections and more armed pride, people learned habits of mild vigilance. Caution became posture. A chair scrapes too sharply near the card table, and 3 heads turn at once. Then nothing happens. That tiny false alarm tells you almost everything. The possibility of violence was present often enough that the room tracked it constantly. But actual eruption was not every minute, nor even every night in many places. Businesses could not thrive on non-stop destruction. A saloon owner wanted paying customers, intact windows, and chairs that stayed in one useful piece. Broken bottles may look exciting in a stage play, but they are terrible for repeat trade. The famous saloon brawl, then, belongs partly to reality and partly to show business. Fights did happen, arguments over cards happened, insults happened, drunken resentment happened, men who had been carrying loneliness, heat, debt, humiliation, or plain foolishness all day could suddenly decide that the room required a demonstration of principle involving their fists. But many disputes ended in words, warnings, laughter, strategic withdrawal, or intervention by friends before anything truly dramatic unfolded. You see the ingredients of conflict everywhere. A ranch hand with too much whiskey in him speaks a little too loudly about a business deal. A gambler smiles in a way another man may choose to call insulting. Someone mishears a joke, someone else hears it perfectly and dislikes it on purpose. A boot heel lands on the wrong foot, a drink is spilled onto a sleeve that has already had a hard week. Most of these moments pass. That matters. The saloon is full not only of threats but of avoided threats. Little failures of violence that never become legend because no one had to replace a door afterward. Historians still argue over how common deadly saloon violence truly was across the West. Partly because newspapers loved sensational incidents, and later memoirs improved many events with hindsight and ego. A dull evening of beer, cards, and mild argument rarely earned a dramatic retelling. A shooting, by contrast, could be exaggerated for years. The surviving record therefore leans toward chaos even when ordinary experience may have leaned toward routine. That is one of history's oldest tricks. Quiet nights leave lighter footprints. A table near the stove offers a good example. 2 men disagree over a debt. One says the amount was larger. The other says memory grows expensive after midnight. Their voices rise, but only slightly. A third man leans in and says something you cannot hear. One of the disputants snorts, the other rolls his eyes. They both drink. The quarrel does not vanish, but it cools enough to survive the evening. This is how many frontiers disputes probably looked in practice. Messy, tense, human, not cinematic enough for later poster art. Then again, danger was real enough to shape behavior. The bartender keeps his tone even with men who are beginning to slur because he knows humiliation can spark more quickly than reason. Servers angle their bodies to keep distance when delivering drinks to certain tables. A gambler watches not only the cards but the faces behind him in the mirror. A piano player continues the tune even when voices sharpen, perhaps because stopping would draw too much attention to the possibility of trouble. The room carries memory in its movements. Somebody has seen enough to prepare for repetition. A quirky frontier fact lingers behind the counter and beneath the stagecraft. Some saloons kept sand, clubs, hidden pistols, or alarm methods within reach because owners understood that prevention and response had to coexist. A polished bar front could present calm while practical precautions waited below. Civilization, once again, like to keep a blunt instrument in reserve. You drift toward a darker corner where conversation is thinner and observation easier. From here, the atmosphere feels denser. Lamp smoke pools near the ceiling. The smell is stronger too. Whiskey, stale beer, cigar ash, wool coats warmed by human bodies, and the faint metallic tang that seems to gather wherever money, tension, and anticipation spend the evening together. Your fingertips rest on the edge of a wooden partition. It feels rough, unfinished on the hidden side, polished only where customers are meant to look. That seems almost symbolic of frontier order. One face toward the public, one face toward contingency. Some violence in saloons was performative. That is important. A man might stand too abruptly, spread his stance, and let silence gather around him as if daring the room to notice his grievance. Another might slap cards down harder than necessary, hoping spectacle alone will pressure an opponent. Sometimes the performance worked. Somebody apologized. Somebody backed down. The audience mattered. A public room rewards display, and many men preferred to look dangerous rather than become damaged. Bluffing existed with fists as surely as with poker hands. The trouble came when both sides insisted on an audience, and neither side wished to be the first to blink. You see the opening stages now between two men near the centre table. Not enemies exactly, more like acquaintances who have been drinking beside an old irritation. One says something with a smile that does not belong to a smile. The other answers in a voice suddenly too precise for comfort. Chairs nearby pause their creaking. A laugh from across the room arrives a moment too late and dies awkwardly. Even the piano seems to soften around the edges. This is the true sound of possible violence, not shouting at first, narrowness. A friend touches one man's sleeve. The gesture is gentle, almost lazy, yet it says enough. Another customer decides to ask loudly for a fresh drink, giving the bartender a reason to move closer. The server who was heading toward that table changes course without fuss. Space opens by increments. Nobody declares an emergency. The room is already solving the problem if it can. One man snorts and looks away. The other takes the offered drink. The audience exhales invisibly. Conversation resumes in little fragments, then larger ones. The danger passes into anecdote before it fully becomes event. There, in that almost nothing, lies the hidden centre of saloon violence. Much of it was negotiated in advance by people skilled at reading thresholds. Of course, not every threshold held. Fistfights did break out, sometimes over astonishingly little. A card accusation, a slur, a woman, a debt, a horse, politics, local honour, which could be both sincerely felt and absurdly fragile. Once fists started, the room changed fast. Chairs toppled. Spectators lunged back or forward depending on temperament. Hats flew. Glass cracked. The piano stopped if the player had any sense, unless continuing somehow seemed safer. A fistfight was loud, clumsy, sweaty, and usually less graceful than stories pretend. Real people do not brawl like dancers. They collide. The image of elegant one-on-one combat is mostly nonsense. Most fights were awkward grapples, wild swings, shoving, slipping, cursing, and men getting tangled in furniture. The smell would sharpen with sweat and spilled liquor. Boots would skid on damp floorboards. Someone would yell unhelpful advice. Someone else would seize the chance to settle a separate grievance under cover of confusion. Violence, in reality, is rarely noble. It is noisy and inconvenient and often embarrassingly physical. Gunplay is the great magnet of Western legend, but here too the myth stretches itself for effect. Gunfights certainly occurred in saloons and around them, yet they were not the hourly punctuation marks of frontier life. Firearms were deadly, unpredictable in crowded rooms, and bad for everybody's business. Many men who carried guns did not wish to use them casually, because shooting another person brought consequences ranging from revenge to prosecution to the simple fact of having killed somebody at close range. Even hard men often preferred the threat, the display, or the possibility over the final act. Scholars continue debating how much later dime novels, Wild West shows, and Hollywood transformed relatively limited patterns of violence into the central image of the frontier itself. The argument matters because it changes how you read the room. If you expect non-stop gun smoke, you miss the ordinary caution and self-control that made saloon life possible. If you imagine total peace, you miss the strain under that control. The truth lives in between. Violence was not constant, but neither was it remote. It was a potential energy people managed nightly. Near the wall hangs a mirror with a faint crack at one edge. It may have come from an accident years ago or from something more dramatic. Either way, it reminds you that objects keep score. A nick in the bar, a patched panel, a replaced chair leg. Marks of old trouble remain in the room long after the men involved have ridden off, sobered up, or been buried elsewhere. The saloon absorbs memory into wood. A man at the far end of the bar lifts his shirt slightly to show a scar while telling a story that grows better with each retelling. His listeners react with the respectful skepticism reserved for tales that are probably true in outline and heroic in decoration. Frontier men often narrated violence as proof of identity, To have faced danger and emerged intact was a kind of social currency. The temptation to improve the account must have been nearly irresistible. Pain, once survived, likes to dress itself in style. You can also sense another quieter truth. Some men entered saloons not seeking conflict at all, but carrying damage already done somewhere else. War service, hard labour, bereavement, exhaustion, old injury, private shame. All of this could lower the distance between irritation and eruption. The saloon did not invent those burdens. It merely concentrated them in one warm room with alcohol and witnesses. That made it an amplifier of human strain as much as a cause. The floor vibrates faintly as a heavy-set customer crosses behind you. A door opens. Cooler air slips in and brushes your cheek, carrying dust from the street. Then the warmth closes again, thick and close. In this brief draught, the whole room feels fragile. Lamps, glass, tempers, songs, wages, all balanced together in a temporary order held by custom and mood. No wonder the saloon fascinated later storytellers. It condensed uncertainty into architecture, yet the deepest reality is less glamorous than the myth and more revealing. Most people in this room do not want a gunfight. They want a drink, a game, a song, a conversation, a release from boredom, maybe an audience for their exaggerations. They tolerate some roughness because frontier life offers little of anything without roughness attached. But ordinary desire still outweighs theatrical doom. A man may boast that he fears no trouble, while privately preferring that trouble remain entirely elsewhere. Sensible instinct and public masculinity often pulled in opposite directions. The bartender wipes the counter again, slow and methodical, as if repetition itself can smooth the room's sharper edges. The piano resumes a steadier tune. A laugh rises from the card table. Someone asks for another round in a voice already relieved by survival. Nothing dramatic has occurred, and that is perhaps the most historically truthful outcome of all. So when you picture violence in the saloon, the most honest image is not endless shooting and shattered mirrors. It is a room alive with managed possibility. It is the pause before insult becomes apology. It is the chair that nearly falls and does not. It is the stare that is answered by a joke instead of a fist. It is the rare eruption made memorable precisely because so many other evenings held themselves together by nerve, habit, and mutual self-interest. Under the smoke and lamplight, danger was real, but it was usually something people circled, measured, and postponed. That may be less flashy than legend. It is also far more interesting. You start to hear that the saloon speaks in more than jokes, songs, and orders for whiskey. It hums with business. At first the talk seems loose and harmless, just another layer of noise floating above the clink of glass and the scrape of chair legs. But when you listen closely, patterns emerge. Prices, names, routes, deadlines, elections, freight, rain, grass, silver, wages, freight again. Because on the frontier almost everything comes back to what can be moved. Sold, found, borrowed, or lost. The saloon is not only a place where people spend money, it is a place where they decide how to make it. Near the back wall, two men sit with their hats tipped back and their voices lowered to a practical murmur. One smells faintly of cigars and hair tonic, the other of horse sweat and dust dried into wool. Their drinks rest half-touched beside their elbows while they discuss cattle prices as if discussing weather, which in a way they are. A change in rain means a change in grass. A change in grass means a change in herd condition. A change in herd condition means money, credit, debt, and very likely somebody's temper. Whole economies can fit inside an apparently dull conversation. That is one of the least glamorous truths about the saloon. It was useful. Men who spent long days scattered across ranches, trails, claims, depots, shops, and road camps needed a place to gather information efficiently. The saloon offered heat, light, company, and a concentrated supply of local knowledge if you wanted to know who had work, who had arrived, who was leaving, which stage was delayed, which mine was rumoured rich, which merchant would extend credit, or which politician was promising miracles at suspiciously low cost. The barroom was often the fastest route. A person could spend one drink and come away with a better map of the town than any printed guide would provide. You hear it in fragments all around you. A freighter complains that road conditions west of town are chewing up wagons. A miner says a man from Denver was asking too many questions about claims. A ranch hand swears there is good grass beyond the creek, if the late frost has not ruined it. A clerk mentions that a shipment of nails is finally expected. Two railroad men argue about schedules with the intensity of priests debating doctrine. Every remark carries practical value to somebody listening nearby. The bartender knows this and lets conversation pool where it can. He does not interrupt good business talk unless it threatens to become bad business for the house. In fact, the saloon profits from being an information exchange. The more useful the room becomes, the more often people return, and the more they spend while waiting, talking, persuading, or overhearing. A chair, a lamp, and a glass can turn gossip into infrastructure. At a small table near the stove, a local merchant unfolds a paper and smooths it flat with both hands. It might be an invoice, a letter, a notice, or a draft of some proposal no one wishes to discuss openly on the street. The man across from him leans in, squinting past the smoke. Their fingertips pin the paper at opposite corners, while they speak in short, careful bursts. You can almost feel the texture of the page from here, slightly rough, perhaps softened by repeated folding, smelling faintly of ink and pocket lint. Business on the frontier often happened like this, half formal and half improvised. Not every deal struck in a saloon was large. Many were modest and immediate: a horse for sale, a room to rent, a load to haul, a cook needed at a camp, a man seeking hands for fencing, another wanting introductions to someone with capital. Labour markets in western towns could be astonishingly informal. The saloon served as hiring hall because workers came there, employers came there, and both groups preferred warmth to standing outdoors performing dignity in the wind. A quirky detail from some western towns lingers in the room's atmosphere. Business cards, handwritten notices, and small advertisements might circulate through saloons with remarkable efficiency, either pinned up, passed hand to hand, or simply memorized after enough retelling. A sentence spoken twice in the right bar could travel across town faster than an official announcement. The frontier respected speed, even when truth arrived limping behind it. That last part matters because the saloon also ran on gossip, and gossip was not a side effect. It was one of the central services. Who is courting whom? Who lost heavily at cards? Which land deal may be crooked? Whether the sheriff is serious about enforcing that new ordinance? Which preacher denounced half the town on Sunday and quietly borrowed money on Monday? Whose mine is richer than he admits? Whose mine is poorer than he admits? Whether the new arrival is respectable, dangerous, broke, connected, or simply overdressed? Social information moved through the saloon in lively imperfect currents. Sometimes it warned, sometimes it entertained, sometimes it ruined people. You hear a cluster of men near the bar discussing a rumoured land purchase beyond the creek. None of them has the full story. All of them speak with conviction. One insists the buyer is an Eastern syndicate with limitless money. Another says it is just a local rancher playing big. A third claims the real point is not land at all, but a rail spur that may come through if certain county men can be persuaded. Suddenly, what began as gossip becomes politics, and nobody in the room seems surprised by the transition. Politics belonged naturally in saloons. That fact annoyed many reformers, but it remained true. In developing towns, public life often unfolded where men already gathered in numbers, and that meant the saloon was frequently a site of debate, persuasion, celebration, and plotting. Candidates bought drinks, supporters made speeches no one had officially requested, office holders floated trial opinions to see how the room reacted. Party loyalties were sharpened, softened, traded, or loudly exaggerated over beer and whiskey. The frontier did not always separate civic life from commercial vice with the tidy boundaries later moralists preferred. Historians still argue over whether saloons strengthened democratic participation by creating informal public forums, or weakened it by tying politics too closely to drink, patronage, and masculine exclusion. Both views contain truth. The saloon gave working men access to political discussion and local influence they might not find elsewhere. It also often shut women out of that conversation, rewarded favoritism, and blurred public duty with private deals. Like much of frontier life, it was energetic, participatory, and unevenly fair all at once. A county candidate has just arrived, and the room reacts with that special mixture of interest and mockery reserved for public men who need votes badly enough to smile through heckling. He moves from table to table with a glass in hand, greeting by first name where possible, pretending memory where not. His coat is brushed better than most in the room. His boots are good leather. His grin is broad enough to suggest either confidence or electoral desperation. Probably both. He begins telling a story about road improvements, tax fairness, and the bright future of the county. The listeners grant him partial attention while continuing to eat, drink, and interrupt. This is not a formal rally. It is more honest than that. He must win over men whose skepticism has been marinated in tobacco smoke and hard experience. A promise made in a saloon receives rough testing. Someone asks who will pay for the road. Another asks when. A third asks whether the candidate intends to pave it with campaign flyers. The room laughs. The candidate laughs too. He has heard worse, or soon will. Gentle sarcasm performs public service here. It keeps speeches from floating too far above reality. A grand claim is met with a dry remark. A moral flourish gets cut down by an anecdote about bridge repairs or missing funds. Men who might never write an editorial can still puncture inflated language with precision. The saloon is not always noble, but it can be brutally effective at trimming nonsense. You drift closer to a table where a shopkeeper, a rancher, and a man with ink on his fingers are discussing the new freight rates. Their voices overlap, then separate. The shopkeeper worries about inventory. The rancher worries about getting hides or cattle to market. The ink-fingered man, perhaps a clerk or newspaper employee, worries about which faction in town will be blamed if rates rise again. All three are thinking economically, politically, and personally at the same time. In a frontier town, those categories rarely stayed in separate drawers. The room smells thicker here. Warm wool, pipe smoke, pepper from the free lunch, a sour trace of beer at the edge of a table where a glass has overflowed, lamp oil, ink, coins warmed in pockets. You can feel the heat from nearby bodies and the slight roughness of the chair back under your palm. It is a fully social atmosphere, dense enough that information seems to stick to the air before settling on whoever needs it. A man by the far window quietly offers short-term credit to someone who does not wish to ask too publicly at the bar. Another fellow nearby is sounding out partners for a speculative venture that may be brilliant, foolish, or both in equal measure. The frontier was built in part by people who could not reliably distinguish opportunity from catastrophe until several months too late. The saloon gave them a place to test their confidence on witnesses. Not every witness was friendly. Gossip could become a form of surveillance. A person's debts, habits, temper, and loyalties might all be measured through repeated saloon appearances. Does he pay promptly? Does she know more than she says? Does he drink too hard after payday? Does he lose quietly or curse at cards? Does he keep company with county men or railroad men or nobody respectable at all? Public rooms generate reputations by accumulation. The saloon did this intensely because it mixed conversation with memory. People returned nightly. Patterns became visible. That visibility could help a town function. It could also become cruel. A struggling man might find it hard to outrun a bad story once the room had accepted it. A politician could be mocked for months over one clumsy speech. A merchant might lose trust if gossip about watered stock or poor accounts took hold. A woman's reputation, far more fragile in public opinion, could be damaged by rumour before facts had even saddled a horse. Information in the saloon moved fast and mercy moved slowly. Still, the appeal of the place is easy to understand. For many who lived in isolation or hard routine, the saloon made them participants in public life. You did not need office, property, or polished speech to join the conversation. You needed enough money for a drink and enough stamina to hold your own in a room full of contrary people. That is a rough kind of accessibility. But it is accessibility all the same. One scholarly uncertainty lingers over the whole scene. Historians continued debating how representative saloon politics really was of entire Western communities, because the room amplified male voices, especially those with disposable cash, while muting many others who influenced town life from homes, churches, boarding houses, businesses, kitchens, and streets beyond the bar. The saloon may have sounded like the whole town to those inside it, but it was never the whole town. It was simply loud enough to feel that way. The candidate finishes his round of shaking hands and leaves behind several half-convinced listeners, 2 firmly unconvinced ones, and at least one man already repeating the speech in a mocking imitation for friends at the next table. That imitation may prove more politically consequential than the original. The West did not lack for informal commentators. At the bar, somebody asks whether the county seat might move. 3 others answer immediately with mutually incompatible certainties. Near the piano, a drummer is praising the future of a settlement most of the room privately suspects will blow away by winter, as Miner claims the latest assay proves fortune is near. A cattle buyer mutters that fortune always seems near right before somebody asks for a loan. The bartender smiles without taking sides. He has seen more futures predicted over this wood than any prophet would dare record, and that may be the deepest truth of the saloon as a civic space. It was a chamber of possibility. Deals began here. Campaigns gathered steam here. Rumours were born here, corrected here, and often made worse here. Hopes for roads, rails, claims, crops, shops, offices, and fortunes all passed through this warm, noisy room before meeting daylight and hard fact. The saloon did not merely reflect frontier society. It helped coordinate it, mislead it, energize it, and entertain it while doing so. You stand in the midst of smoke, lamplight, and argument, hearing money talk in the language of gossip and politics talk in the language of appetite, and the whole place seems suddenly larger than its walls. It is not just a drinking den, it is a switchboard of local life, a rough public forum where news, business, ambition, vanity, and need collide over glasses that never stay full for long. In the Old West, many decisions that shaped a town's next morning first found their voice in a saloon at night. The night does not end all at once. That would be too neat for a saloon, and the saloon is rarely neat at the hour when energy begins to loosen from the room. Closing time comes as a gradual thinning. A laugh lands, then another does not follow it. A card table finishes a hand and lingers before beginning the next. Someone at the bar stares into his glass a little longer than the liquor deserves. The piano slows, though perhaps only because the player's wrists have carried an entire evening already. You can feel the room shifting from appetite toward exhaustion, from performance toward disclosure. The lamps have burned lower now. Their light is softer, less eager, almost honey-coloured where it settles across the counter and tabletops. Shadows deepen in the corners. Faces that looked animated an hour ago seem suddenly lined, thoughtful, or simply tired. Evening had granted everyone a second self for a while, bolder or louder or more charming than the day version. As the hour wears on, that second self starts to slip. What remains is more revealing. Near the bar, a man who earlier told stories large enough to require hand gestures in every direction has gone quiet. He cups his glass with both hands, warming what little is left inside, and looks at the mirror without really admiring his reflection. Another fellow counts coins twice before ordering, not because he mistrusts arithmetic, but because the night has narrowed his options and he knows it. A server gathers empty glasses from one table and finds nobody there to claim the jokes that had seemed so lively 20 minutes earlier. Closing time has a way of exposing the temporary nature of fellowship. Company can be real and still be brief. The smell of the room changes with the hour too. Freshly poured liquor recedes. What remains is the older scent underneath, beer soaked into wood, tobacco thick in curtains and clothes, lamp oil, dust brought in from the street and now trampled into the floorboards, the sharp little tang of coins, the softer note of bread crusts and pickle brine from a nearly emptied lunch spread, the faint soap scent clinging to a towel that has long since lost the battle. It is the smell of human use, not of glamour. The room has been lived in hard tonight. You notice the small tasks that emerge when excitement fades. Chairs are nudged back into order. Sticky rings are wiped from wood. Cards are squared and slid away. A spittoon is moved with the kind of stoic resignation that deserves its own medal. Empty bottles are counted or set aside. A keg is checked. A till is opened and closed with greater seriousness than before. Business remains after sociability loosens its collar. Money must be measured even when laughter has run out. That practical turn is one of the truest features of saloon life, no matter how much legend adored the flash of it. The saloon was a business first, or it would not remain open long enough to collect legends. Profit lived in the final count as much as in the evening's noise. The owner or bartender adds up the night in coin, notes, unpaid tabs, broken glass, and damaged temper. A crowded room may feel prosperous, but prosperity is only real when the draw confirms it. You watch the bartender at this late stage and see a different kind of skill than earlier. The quick public motions are still there, but now they are joined by quiet bookkeeping. He marks down credit, settles disputed amounts with a look, and reminds one regular of what is owed in a voice low enough to preserve dignity. That courtesy matters. A man who leaves embarrassed may not return. A man who leaves chastened yet intact might. Commerce has its tenderness when handled by experience. At one table, the final players seem unable to decide whether to quit or continue. Their stacks of coin have grown smaller, their expressions duller, yet they shuffle almost by instinct now. There is something touching about it. The game has become less about winning than delaying the hour when one must stand, step into the colder dark, and return to whatever room or camp or rented corner of life waits outside. In this sense, closing time is not merely the end of entertainment. It is the reappearance of reality. A quirky truth from many drinking establishments of the era drifts into your thoughts. Closing times were not always as fixed or uniformly enforced as later law books might suggest. Ordinances existed in some towns, but practice could bend according to local custom, enforcement, influence, or the owner's judgment about who still counted as profitable company. A law on paper did not always reach the bottom of a glass. The frontier was very good at negotiating with official time. Still, they rooms do empty. One man leaves decisively, hat down, coat on, no backward glance, as if he has learned that farewell can be dangerous if allowed too much sentiment. Another lingers by the door, speaking to 3 different people in succession, each exchange shorter than the last. A pair of companions who arrived separately now depart together for the safety of shared footing. Outside, their boots strike the boardwalk or packed ground with the sound you can hear faintly through the swinging doors. The street beyond feels larger and darker now, less a thoroughfare than a gap between islands of lamplight. The pianist finally lets a tune finish without reaching for the next one. Silence does not rush in all at once, but it becomes possible to notice it gathering. The ears, so long adjusted to layers of noise, begin to hear the room differently. The settling creak of wood, the faint pop of a cooling stove, the brush of a rag over the bar, a cough from the far corner, coins counted in little metallic stacks. The saloon sounds older when nearly empty. There are always a few faces that closing time treats with special honesty. The tired worker who came mostly for warmth now looks as though warmth has worn off. The gambler who played cool all evening appears suddenly fragile under the lamp. The singer, no longer performing, rubs the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers and becomes simply a woman whose shift has been long. The server stretches one shoulder when she thinks no one sees. The bartender rolls his neck once, then resumes wiping down the counter with that same even discipline the room has relied on for hours. Late-night strips rolls down to bodies. Historians still debate how much sentimental memory has softened the harsher realities of the saloon's end of day. Memoirs often bathe closing time in nostalgia, as if the room glowed with fellowship right up to the last lamp. Yet business records, reform accounts, and some eyewitness descriptions suggest something more mixed. Weariness, clean-up, unpaid debts, loneliness, and occasional danger all lingered after the songs faded. The truth was probably both softer and harder than nostalgia allows. Human beings are capable of genuine warmth and quiet disappointment in the same minute. You move toward the doorway, but not out of it yet. From there, the room looks different, with fewer bodies between you and the walls. The architecture reasserts itself. The long bar seems longer, the mirror more reflective and slightly sadder. The chairs look like objects again, rather than extensions of people's moods. Sawdust or tracked dirt shows where boots have travelled. A forgotten napkin or crust of bread sits under a table awaiting tomorrow's judgment. The room is returning to itself, yet traces of the evening remain everywhere. A damp ring on the counter where somebody rested a final beer. A cigar end crushed too late into a tray. A card overlooked near the leg of a chair. A scarf left hanging for a moment before someone remembers it with alarm and gratitude. A joke half remembered. A rumour already leaving the building in 2 separate versions. A debt entered in a ledger. A promise made warmly that may look less convincing in daylight. Saloons did not merely host nights. They manufactured consequences. Some of those consequences were small: a headache, a lost coin, a new acquaintance, a late walk home under stars sharp enough to sober a person against his will. Some were larger: a job arranged, a vote influenced, a quarrel cooled or worsened, a reputation improved, a reputation damaged, a little hope acquired for a venture that will probably fail. The frontier ran on such mixtures of triviality and importance. Much that mattered began in places that looked, at first glance, unserious. A woman near the side door ties her shawl more closely around her shoulders before stepping out. The singer exchanges a few final words with the pianist. Both of them no longer public figures now, just tired workers measuring the end of labour. One man sleeps briefly in his chair and must be woken with a gentle firmness that suggests the staff has done this before. Another customer makes a show of perfect steadiness while putting on his hat, then nearly misses the peg. The bartender catches the hat and says nothing cruel. That restraint is kindness dressed as routine. The touch of the air by the door is cooler now whenever it swings open. It brushes your face, carrying dust, horse smell, and the faint dampness of night settling outdoors. Inside remains warm, but it is a used warmth, tired around the edges. The contrast is striking. The saloon has been a world unto itself for hours, but the larger world has waited patiently outside, black and wide and unimpressed. In many Western towns, that outside darkness mattered as much as anything within. Streets could be uneven, unlit, or thinly watched. Lodging might be distant, campfires might be dying. Homes, boarding rooms, bunkhouses, or lonely hotel chambers waited to receive whoever left here carrying fatigue, drink, cash, regret, or luck. Closing time, therefore, had a practical seriousness. Leaving the saloon was not merely exiting a building, it was re-entering the night. And yet there is something gentle in this last phase too. Perhaps because the worst noise has burned itself off. Perhaps because even boastful men cannot perform forever. Perhaps because work completed always leaves behind a kind of hush. The saloon at the end of the night feels almost intimate in spite of itself. Without the crowd, you can sense how much human need has moved through the room. Not just thirst or greed or vanity, though those were present in cheerful abundance. Also, companionship, warmth, relief. A place to sit under light while the dark stayed outside a little longer. A final chair is turned upside down on a table. Another follows. The gesture is practical, but it feels ceremonial too, like a curtain falling in plain language. The bartender checks the door once, then the till again. A lamp is lowered or snuffed. Immediately the shadows claim more ground. The mirror dims. The polished bar loses some of its magic and becomes wood once more. It is always surprising how quickly enchantment retreats when the light changes. Scholarly uncertainty lingers even here. Historians continue to debate how representative the saloon was of Old West life as a whole, because its prominence in memory may exceed its proportion in daily experience. Not everyone drank. Not everyone entered. Not every town revolved around a bar room. Yet the saloon remains central in historical imagination because it gathered so many frontier pressures into one visible place. Work, vice, leisure, money, politics, performance, loneliness, and community all met here under one roof. Closing time reveals that concentration most clearly. Once the crowd thins, you can almost see the social machinery cooling. The last customers shuffle out. One mutters good night to no one in particular. Another says he will settle the remainder tomorrow, a sentence older than optimism itself. The door swings, then settles. The room quiets further. Now you hear only the final cleaning, the low voice of staff, the muffled clink of glass stacked for morning, and perhaps a broom beginning its patient sweep over the planks. Dust, crumbs, ash, and tiny scraps of the night gather together at last. You take one last look. By day, the saloon may appear smaller, rougher, more ordinary than legend likes. But at this hour, in the hush after the crowd, it feels strangely honest. It has offered what it could. Drinks, games, rumours, songs, bargains, moments of vanity, moments of loneliness soothed by noise. It has taken money in return and probably a little dignity from some, but it has also given shelter from emptiness. No wonder people remembered such rooms so vividly. They were not just where things happened. They were where people tried, for an evening, to feel larger than the hard facts of their lives. Now the final lamp grows dimmer and the room softens into shadow. The wooden floor, worn by boots and time, seems to breathe out the day's heat. The smell of smoke settles low and quiet. Somewhere outside, a horse shifts its weight, and the sound reaches you like a distant reminder that the world continues beyond these walls. Inside, the last movements become slower, gentler. A rag folds. A drawer closes. A chair leg touches down with a muted tap. You let the stillness widen. The voices that filled the room are gone now, or nearly so, leaving only a faint memory of laughter tucked into the beams. The mirror behind the bar catches one last glow and then gives it back to the dark. The counter stands empty. No hands leaning on it. No coins sliding over it. No glass ringing softly on its polished surface. It rests at last. Even the piano seems to sleep, its keys pale in the low light, waiting for another night to wake them, and you can feel the whole place easing downward, like a tired chest after a long breath. The saloon was never just noise, never just vice, never just legend. It was a human room, warm, flawed, watchful, and full of temporary mercies. For a few hours it gathered strangers and regulars into the same circle of lamplight and gave them music, warmth, stories, and something to do with their solitude. Then, as all such places must, it loosened its grip and returned them to the night. So you step back from the doorway in your mind and let the darkness grow softer around the building, around the street, around the sleeping town beyond it. The smoke thins. The lamps fade. The boards cool. Somewhere overhead, the stars remain patient and unchanged, while below them the little room that held so much of frontier life finally goes quiet. Let the quiet stay with you now. Let the last scraps of piano music drift away. Let the glasses stop ringing, the boots stop scraping, the voices stop calling across the room. Only the hush remains, gentle and deep. Only the old wood, the dim bar, the fading lamp, and the night air moving softly through the silence. And in that stillness, the saloon becomes what all memory becomes when the noise leaves it. A warm light far away, a doorway closing softly, a room at rest. The word count 1989. End of script. Sleep well.